I was born and raised in Appalachia. I spent my first 22 years in Kentucky, then moved to Tennessee. I'd always loved the outdoors and was lucky enough to get a job with the Forest Service a few years after high school. My family back in Kentucky had a lot of issues, and being in another state without cell reception most of the time felt like an escape. I learned a lot about survival in my time with the Forest Service. I love the wide open spaces and the sense of peace being in nature brings, rather than spending my days stuck in a cubicle under fluorescent lights. And I like helping people. I've helped many lost hikers find their way back, and even assisted in rescues for injured hikers. It was the perfect job for me. I live alone in a trailer with my Labrador Barkley. My nephew, Riker, flew in to visit a few weeks after his college graduation. He'd always wanted to hike the Appalachian Trail, and I supported this, but only if he was prepared. Too many young people watch a few survival shows and think they're ready to handle whatever nature brings. I was always really close to Riker despite being estranged from the rest of my family. I never settled down or had children, mostly because work took up so much of my time. So Riker was the closest relative I had, and I wanted to pass along the skills I'd carefully acquired over the years, before I got too old. I met Riker at the airport, and he gave me a huge bear hug. We went back to my trailer, and I cooked him up some steak and potatoes. We talked about our plans for the week. I took some vacation time to spend the entire week hiking together. We would set out on the trail tomorrow morning. I strongly suggested Riker get a good night's sleep. We would have our work cut out for us tomorrow. But before he retired to the guest room, I needed to give him a warning. "Hey, make sure you close the curtains in there before you go to sleep," I told him. Riker looked confused. "Okay, but there's no one out here. We're literally in the middle of nowhere. It's not like anyone's going to look in the windows," he said, laughing. "We'll talk about it tomorrow," I assured him. Luckily, Riker was always very respectful about following my household rules, so he agreed. After spending some time getting our equipment ready for tomorrow, I headed to bed myself. I made sure to close my bedroom curtains before drifting off. You see, when I first moved out here, I used to like the moonlight streaming in through my window at night. Being in a secluded area, I didn't think it was a problem. One night I woke up and, still groggy, glanced out the window next to my bed. I noticed two red lights a few inches apart. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. They weren't lights, they were eyes. And they were unnaturally red. I knew the wildlife in the area, and there was nothing that could explain what I saw. As I watched, the eyes began to slowly rise, as if whatever creature was attached to them stood up. I slowly backed out of the bedroom and shut the door. I slept on the living room couch that night. I've never slept with my curtains open again. On the morning of our trip, I woke up early. Anxious and excited to get started, I gave up trying to sleep and started brewing coffee around 5 a.m. Although I tried to be as quiet as possible, Riker woke up around 5:30. So we decided to eat breakfast and get an early start. As I was making breakfast, Riker glanced over to see Barkley standing outside on the front porch, scratching on the sliding glass door. He got up to let him in. Just as he got to the door, I yelled, "Wait!" Riker paused, looking confused. I motioned for Riker to follow me into the living room. I pointed to Barkley, who was sleeping peacefully on his bed. "Keep the door closed," I whispered to Riker. He nodded. "Is it a stray?" he asked. I shook my head. You see, Barkley was a very distinctive-looking dog. He was older, and his coat was going gray. He also had a scar over his left eye from a fight with a raccoon many years ago. Riker glanced back to the sliding glass door and noticed the dog was gone. This was another rule that I needed to tell Riker. If you see anything that looks like your pet trying to come into your house or campsite, make sure it's really them. Riker asked what just happened. But I didn't think he would believe me. So I just told him I'd explain later, since we needed to be on our way. While Riker did seem disturbed by this incident, he was a trooper and was ready to set out an hour later. The next few hours of hiking were amazing. We took in the beautiful views and got a chance to catch up. I'd been debating when to tell Riker about the rules for the trail, but I was worried he wouldn't take it seriously. At least not yet. Before he arrived for his visit, I'd tried explaining that the Appalachian Mountains have a lot of strange supernatural activity, but he wasn't really interested. I'll admit, I didn't believe most of it either, at first. It took seeing it with my own eyes for me to understand. But that's why I'm here with my nephew, to show him that things are out there that we can't understand. But if we follow the rules, we'll be okay. After another hour of hiking, Riker began to look uneasy and stopped every few steps to look around. Finally, I stopped to ask what was wrong. "Don't you hear that?" he asked. I shook my head. We continued walking while staying quiet. Then I heard it. The sound was similar to a tornado siren off in the distance, but it sounded distorted. I stopped Riker in his tracks. "We need to get as far away from that noise as possible," I said. Riker briefly tried to argue that we should get closer in case it's a weather alert siren. I let him know it was deadly serious that we get away from the source. We started running in the opposite direction. Eventually, the sound started to fade, like it was getting farther away. But a few minutes later, we heard a loud blast from the siren, almost right in front of us. "What the hell?" Riker yelled, putting his hands over his ears. We were running hard now, which was extremely unpleasant, carrying all our equipment. Suddenly, we were forced to stop dead in our tracks. The ground beneath us started to shake, and what looked like an old vine-covered telephone pole with speakers at the top began moving across the trail. The siren was deafening. Riker and I booked it. We didn't stop moving until we hadn't heard the siren for a good 20 minutes. We both tripped over roots several times and were pretty scratched up and out of breath by the end. Riker demanded an explanation. He wanted to know what the hell was going on out here. So I decided it was time to have the talk with him. He'd be much more open-minded now that he'd seen some things with his own eyes. So I agreed to give him the rundown. It was hard to remember all the strange things that had happened out here and how to avoid them. But when Riker told me he was going to hike the Appalachian Trail, I made a list of rules for him and wrote down what I could remember. Always sleep with your curtains closed. Leaving them open can result in waking up to red eyes peering through. I've only had one brief encounter with the red eyes, but another ranger I knew wasn't so lucky. Dan Williams was young, around 30, and in great health. One day he didn't report for duty. This wasn't typical for him, as he was one of the most dependable people I knew. Being a close friend of Dan's, I drove to his house and knocked on the door. After getting no answer, I saw that it was unlocked. I entered and called out to him. There was no answer. When I got to his bedroom, I had a bad feeling. I opened the door to find him lying on the bed, completely still. His eyes and mouth were wide open, frozen in the worst expression of horror I've ever seen. I quickly contacted emergency services. When I reported back to our boss, he asked if the curtains in the bedroom were open. I confirmed. I tried to ask why he wanted to know, but he wouldn't elaborate. After my own encounter, I started closing them every night. If your pet is trying to get into your home or campsite, make sure it's really them. Letting the wrong one in is like putting out a welcome mat to an evil spirit. If you hear a siren out in the woods that doesn't sound quite right, avoid getting close to it at all costs. The sound you're hearing isn't a siren at all. It's a cryptid that uses the sound to lure people in. This creature disguises itself as an old rusty telephone pole or speaker. Whenever its intended victims get within range, it will detach from the ground and chase them down. It's been said by some of the older folks who are familiar with this cryptid that if caught, the victim's screams are harvested to power the siren. There is a creature that roams the Appalachian Mountains called a wampus cat. It's unlike any other large feline in that it has 6 legs, 4 in front and 2 in the back. It's larger than a full-grown lion and has unnatural abilities. These include being able to outrun arrows and, in some cases, even bullets. The wampus cat can walk on its hind legs and has piercing golden eyes. Avoid making eye contact at all costs. Making eye contact results in a hypnotic state. If you become hypnotized, you'll be unable to move and eaten. If you encounter a wampus cat, your best bet is to catch it off guard and shoot it, or try to hide if you don't have a gun. Forget outrunning it. You wouldn't have a prayer. If you're out in the woods and you hear someone say your name, but there's no one visible, pretend you didn't hear it. You may also hear other things, like the sound of a baby crying or someone calling for help in a monotone voice. As unnerving as this is to hear, ignore it. Even so much as turning around or following the voice for a few steps can lure you to your death. Several years ago, while working on trail maintenance, I had a woman frantically run up to me, screaming for help. She said her name was Jenny and explained that she and her husband were hiking when he started acting strange. He got really quiet and stopped to look around every few steps. She asked what was wrong, and he said he thought he heard their son call out to him. This wasn't possible because their son, 10-year-old Brandon, had passed away the year before. He was hit by a car while riding his bike. Jenny tried to talk him out of following the voice, telling him this couldn't be Brandon. Her husband, however, was determined and refused to listen. He went off trail to follow the voice. She looked for him for over an hour, almost getting lost herself in the process. I agreed to help look for him, but eventually had to call in backup, as I was unable to locate him. He was quickly declared missing, and a full-on search began. Sadly, this story doesn't have a happy ending. His body was recovered at the bottom of a steep drop-off. It was unclear if he jumped or was pushed. Don't whistle outside at night. I made this mistake once when I was younger and camping with my dog. This was before Barkley. It was my old dog, Rex. I'd been warned by other forest workers not to whistle at night, but naturally, I was in my early 20s and thought it was just some old wives' tale. I'd been hiking all day and started drinking by the campfire as it got dark. Rex was pretty good about staying nearby, so I let him wander off-leash during the day. As it got dark, though, I became apprehensive about him getting lost or hurt, so I whistled for him to come back. He didn't respond to my whistle at first, which was extremely unusual for him. I felt my heart race. I couldn't handle something happening to Rex. He'd been my one constant companion in my very solitary lifestyle. "Rex!" I yelled as I whistled again, louder this time. I noticed that it sounded like my whistle had an echo, which didn't make sense. Rex finally ran back to me. His demeanor was different than it had been the rest of the day. He was clearly on edge, looking into the woods and growling. I shined my flashlight in the direction he was focused on, but saw nothing. I finished up the rest of what was in my flask and turned in for the night. I woke up around 2 a.m. with the distinct feeling of being watched. I got out of my tent to look around. The light on my flashlight kept dimming despite having a new battery. I smacked it, trying to get it to work. The first thing I noticed was that Rex was nowhere to be found. I called out to him and whistled again. Just then, my flashlight went out. I heard a distant crunching of branches. I got my flashlight to work just enough to see the outline of something about 10 feet from my campsite. It appeared to be a rail-thin white figure that looked vaguely humanoid. Its stature was what really alarmed me. It was unnaturally tall, I'm guessing around 7 feet, but walked hunched over. Its neck was also unnaturally long, and its head was looking forward. The creature's gait was like a slow, distorted crawl. I stood in frozen silence. "What the?" I whispered to myself. This was a huge mistake. The figure's head turned at a sharp, unnatural angle, and it began to screech. The noise was like nothing I'd ever heard. Think of a distorted human scream mixed with an injured animal. I dove back into my tent, grabbing my bear repellent and knife. Stupidly, I hadn't brought my gun on this trip. I could hear it screeching outside my tent and knew it was time to defend myself. Just as I turned around, I heard a snarl and sharp bark. Rex! The figure let out another screech and charged back into the woods. I noticed Rex had blood on his muzzle. I hugged him, checking for any harm done. Luckily, he was unscathed, although he was still very nervous. "Good boy," I said. Needless to say, I don't whistle in the woods anymore. If you ever become lost on the trail for longer than a day, don't trust everything you see. An old friend of mine, John, who also worked for the Park Service, became lost during a solo excursion. He was a very skilled survivalist and knew the trails like the back of his hand, so I was shocked when I heard he was missing. He was found about a week later, but he wasn't himself. He babbled on and on about finding a cottage with a woman living there who rescued him. He said she gave him tea and pastries, then allowed him to stay in her guest room. He reported feeling drowsy the entire week he was there, but had strange memories of the woman coming in and out of his room with food and tea. He said some of the tea had sliced mushrooms floating in it. When he was asked how he got out, he said he just woke up one day on the forest floor. John attempted to show his rescuers where the home was, but there was nothing there. He became obsessed with searching for it, and the rescuers had to convince him to take some time off and get medically cleared. John's mental state never recovered. He lives in a long-term care facility now. At first, I assumed this experience was just a high-stress event that may have triggered underlying mental health issues, but other rangers have told me this wasn't a unique story. So like I said, if you're lost on the Appalachian Trail and you see a cottage in the woods, don't trust it. Stop and ask yourself if what you're seeing makes sense before going in to ask for help. If you see a woman in her 60s wearing silver eyeglasses wandering around in the woods and she asks you how to get back to the trail, assist her. If you successfully help her find her way back, you'll be granted good luck for the next 7 years. See, this woman was a very avid and determined hiker. She got lost off-trail one day and was unable to find her way back. Her body was recovered a few years later. She is a benevolent spirit, and hikers who have seen her have described her as having an infectious smile. A coworker of mine told me about a case where a lost hiker reported seeing this woman while off-trail. The woman with the silver glasses said she was lost too. The hiker reported they walked together for a few hours, just talking about life and trying to locate the trail. The woman suggested making a turn that did lead back onto the trail. The hiker was ecstatic, but when he turned around to thank her, she was gone. The woods should never be completely silent. You should always be able to hear something. Bugs, animals, birds, water, wind, basically anything. If you're ever on the trail and notice you're in complete silence, keep moving until things sound normal again. You should also talk, hum, sing, or turn on music to break the silence until you get to a normal area. I don't have first-hand experience with not following this rule, as the uneasy feeling of being in total silence is usually enough to keep me moving. There is an old man with a long beard and a walking stick who may approach your campsite as you are sitting around the fire with friends or family. He will calmly take a seat and begin sharing a story. Do not ask him who he is, interrupt the story, or walk away while he is talking. Legend has it that if you do, someone from your group will walk into the woods during the night, never to be seen again. I narrowly avoided this a few years ago, camping with a few of my buddies. As the old man approached, I was about to ask if anyone knew him when my friend put his hand over his mouth and shook his head, giving me a serious look. After all the strange things I'd encountered over the years, I took his word for it and stayed silent. The old man's story was actually pretty good. I honestly wouldn't mind running into him again. While hiking in Appalachia, you may come across a large camp in an area not designated for camping. Usually, these are pretty far off-trail. These are off-grid communities that don't like outsiders. The camp will likely consist of handmade tents, various survival supplies, and oftentimes there are active fires, sometimes even with food still cooking. But there won't be anyone there. It may be tempting to look around or even help yourself to food or supplies. But please don't do it, even if you notice something at the site that was stolen from your campsite. Although these camps appear empty, you are being watched in real time, and you will be attacked if you take anything. These groups protect their camps at all costs, and they not only outnumber you, but also know the terrain much better than you. That was the list I'd written out for Riker. We talked over everything as we set up camp that night. Despite his arrogance before, at this point he was convinced to follow the rules. We prepared dinner and had a good night, talking about old times. I turned in around midnight. I slept peacefully for a while, then began having a strange dream. I was sitting on a rocking chair on the large porch of what appeared to be an old farmhouse. It was dusk, and the air was still. Off in the distance, I noticed an animal approach. It was about the size of a large dog. But as it got closer, I noticed something wasn't right. Although it had the stature and build of a dog, the animal's head was that of a rabbit. But it was much larger than any rabbit I'd ever seen. I stood up as it approached. Its eyes were hollow, dark sockets, and I didn't understand how it was able to see. I started panicking, trying to unlock the door to the house. It wouldn't open. Footsteps approached on the porch behind me as I pounded on the door. Just then, my eyes shot open. I was in my tent, hyperventilating. Relieved it was only a dream, I turned over and got comfortable again. I was finally starting to drift off when I felt my blanket slowly slide off of me. I froze. The air became ice cold despite the temperature outside. I heard whispering from many directions. They were all different, distinct voices. "Uncle James!" yelled Riker. I sat up. He dove into my tent, trying to catch his breath. "Did something just happen to you too?" he asked. I nodded. "I read about this a while back. I think it's the Bell Witch," Riker said. I was somewhat familiar with the historical haunting, but I'd never known anyone who was haunted by her on the trail. Riker and I packed up our things and relocated camp. The next day, Riker laughed about how he now had something to add to my list. I nodded. Most don't realize just how old these mountains are. They've been on this earth for millions of years. They've seen things no human has or ever will. I've discovered so much on the trail, but I doubt I'll get to know all its secrets in this lifetime. "Riker, can you promise me something?" I asked. "Sure. Anything," he said. "When you tell other people about this place, don't leave out the good things." Riker looked at me, confused. "What I mean is, I know a lot of weird stuff happens out here, but it's also one of the most beautiful and peaceful places on Earth. There are so many good people here too. Just make sure you don't leave that out whenever you tell your friends back home about this trip. Don't worry, Uncle James. I actually have some news. I'm moving out here next month. I got a job at the community college. I want to be closer to the trail. And now that I'm graduated and everything, going back home just doesn't seem like a good idea for me." I chuckled. "So even after seeing all that, you're ready for more?" He nodded. I gave him the sheet of paper with the list. "Keep this up to date," I said, smiling. "You're going to need it." How do you feel about my video? If you like, please like and subscribe, and comment to let me know. That is a great motivation for me. Thank you, guys. On a hot night in August, with my head splitting open, I went for a run. Most people prefer the daylight, the birds singing and the sun on their necks. But I like the quiet brought on by nightfall, especially around the pond by my house, where folks rarely venture after dark. My mother has repeatedly begged me not to run at night on our weekly phone calls. She says it's no time to be out of the house alone. "For heaven's sake, Sam," she said earlier that night, "I have enough to stress about with your sister. Don't you watch the news?" I could see my mother wasn't going to drop the subject, so I decided to put her mind at ease. I told her I would stop running at night. "Really?" she asked, surprised to hear me say it. "If you care this much about it." "I really do," she replied. "Okay then, I do too." In truth, she was crazy if she thought I was going to stop. I needed it more than ever, seeing as a headache had woken up in my head that morning and grown increasingly bitter with each passing hour. By dinner time, I could barely breathe and chew food at the same time. The concentration it took to do both was just too much to muster. I've gotten these headaches all my life. They've baffled doctors and driven away partners seeking a night of sleep without being jolted awake by pained screams. They get so bad sometimes that dogs bark and snap at me when I pass by them, like they can smell the blood pounding behind my eyes. So that night in August, despite what I told my mother, I ran. I ran because sometimes if I run fast enough, I can leave the headache behind, like a lost child sitting on the curb. But the pain pursued me aggressively that night. It followed me my entire run, licking at my heels until I could barely keep my feet moving in proper rhythm. The run became an awkward jog at best, punctuated by the small cries that occasionally slipped from my lips. My feet pounded the street, then the trail around Emerson Pond, as I tried not to think about the pounding in my head. The pond has become my private sanctuary, what with only a few locals bothering to walk the trail, and half of those teens looking to smoke their herbs in private. The pond is nothing special to look at, really, but something beyond the isolation it offers has always drawn me in. I like the area just past the black gazebo best. It's comfortable and safe, my own corner of the world tucked away from the eyes and ears that pry. I had just passed the gazebo, in fact, when the pain in my temple suddenly intensified. It got so bad I had to stop running or risk falling down. I pressed my fist against the side of my head as if to hold my skull together, a sailor plugging the leak in a sinking boat. My brains felt as if they would erupt from my ears and ooze down my running clothes if I took my fists away for even a moment. My vision swam. I choked on the night air, sputtering and coughing, and spitting up droplets of mist that hung for a moment in the pale yellow light. My head felt like the sound a knife makes when it's dragged across the sharpening stone. Right about the time I finally took a breath, forcing the night air down into my burning chest, I heard the baby crying in the trees. The noise was like a bucket of cold water to the face. I squinted between the trees and into the pool of shadows, dissecting it with my eyes. I couldn't see past the first row of trees, and yet the cries were as loud as if I were standing next to a crib, the agonizing cries of a baby, primal and raw. I thought of the homeless people that sometimes lived in the parks, addicts and other unfortunates. I see them sometimes, stealing away to their hiding places when they think no one is looking. They've been dealt a poor hand and played it as well as could be expected. Like most people, I look the other way when they come around with their hands out. Hey, mostly because to stare too long, to look too closely into their eyes, affords me uncomfortable views of myself. Catching my breath with a din of cricket chirps pressing down on me from all sides, I listened to the crying in the trees, the screams for help. I thought if I stood there a while, if I waited long enough, someone would pick it up, comfort it, and stop it from crying. I figured they were likely far more scared of me, a citizen who might call the police, than I was of them. But the crying didn't stop. It continued unaided, and if anything, grew in desperation, until even the oppressive buzz of the night insects bowed under its weight, and all that could be heard were the shrill wailings of that unseen child. I could stay quiet no longer. "Is someone there?" I finally called out, but the only reply was more crying, more wailing. If there was anyone else present, they weren't making themselves known. Deciding I'd had enough, I pulled the phone from my pocket and dialed the police. After giving a brief description of my location to the operator, I told the gravelly-voiced woman what was happening. "A baby?" the operator asked. "That's right." Although the headache had receded to the back of my mind, I still felt it poking around back there, a ghost floating in my peripheral, an echo. "Then the bone. Can't you hear it?" There was a pause on the line as the operator listened. "I'm afraid not." I huffed into the night. "That's ridiculous. It's louder than—" I stopped talking. I stopped talking because I realized the crying had fallen silent. Only the insects were screaming now, their leg sounds accompanied by the soft lapping of nearby pond water. "Are you there?" Yeah. "Yes, I'm here." "Do you want us to send an officer? A patrol car can be there in a few minutes." I listened again to the trees, but they were as silent as empty graves. How embarrassing. I felt like I'd brought my car in to be serviced only to have the problem disappear when I explained it to the mechanic. "If you're still there, I need you to say something." "Sorry, yes. I think you should send someone. I know what I heard, but I can't. It was so dark out there. I can't go in there." "That's fine. Stay put and an officer will be there soon." "I'm okay. I'll be okay. I said, more to myself than to the operator. She offered to stay on the line, but I declined, assuring her I would keep my distance until the officer showed up. As I hung up the phone and returned it to my pocket, the bushes beneath the trees shifted. They rustled as if disturbed by something or someone. "Who's there?" I called out. I waited a heart-pounding moment. Then, "Sam," a voice oozed from the shadows, drawing out the sound. I froze. I wanted to back up, to walk away, to run, but my legs had gone icy cold. "That's not my name," I said, trying to keep my voice from wavering. "Sam Stewart of Miracle Street," the voice said. It was a wet, stinking sound, like an untreated lung infection. I couldn't pick the voice apart enough to tell if it was a man or a woman. I tightened my hands in a fist and willed myself to stay strong. "Who are you?" "Why, I'm an old friend. Don't you recognize me?" My mind raced. Did I really know the unseen person? Or were they toying with me? Of course, there was a third option, that they were insane. A stalker who knew me, even if I didn't know them. "I can't see you," I replied. The wet voice laughed at me. The sound was like an intestine being cut into, almost a woman's voice, but old and sickly, with a throat full of teeth. "You don't need to see me to know me. You only need to feel the pain in your skull." I nearly cried out. How did they know about the headaches? Was it like the dogs, picking up the scent of my pain? "The police will be here any minute," I managed to say, trying to sound intimidating. And why would they do that, Sam Stewart of Marigold Street? Because I called them. Oh, with what? What do you mean, with what? With that, my hand shot to my side, feeling the outside of my pocket, then diving in to check it. There was no phone there, nothing but a set of keys. I searched my memory, but I couldn't remember grabbing my phone before leaving the house. And yet I'd spoken to an operator. I was sure of it. I'd had a full conversation with a woman who... The laugh came again, bubbling up from the dark like a cobra thrashing around in its own blood. "The senses can be so deceptive," it said as it leaned forward from the shadows, finally showing itself to me. "But memory, oh sweet Sam, memory is no better." The face in the trees, lit by the pale light of the waning moon, was like staring into a nightmare, a thing at once both palpable and impossible, a cesspool of violence and rot. It evoked 1,000 images of dying animals, teeth grinding and fever screams, car accidents and napalmed flesh. I saw everything and nothing in the shapeless form of that face. A wound opened up to share its sights. I felt its eyes crawl up my face like half-dead vines and grow in the pools of my sinuses, nesting comfortably in the crooks of my mouth. "Do you remember me now, Sam?" it asked, the voice moving through my veins like an aqueduct, a sewer of black sludge running through my life. Years of pain and fear recalled in a single moment. I stumbled back, as if suddenly remembering I was in possession of legs. Then I ran as hard as I could, stumbling over myself to escape that place, to put it behind me and not look back, not ever look back. "Don't you want to save the child?" the face in the trees called after me. I reached my house a few frantic minutes later. The distance hadn't calmed my nerves, nor did all those glances over my shoulder to make sure I was alone. I clawed the door open like my back was on fire and threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me so hard I thought it would crack the frame. My clothes were soaked with sweat. I fell on my phone and called the police. Before the other end picked up, I briefly wondered if this time the call was real, or if it was another false memory. No use thinking like that, I decided. But what would I say to the operator? Would I tell them about the baby's cries? About what I'd seen in the stranger's face? Was it even a face that I'd seen? I had no time to decide. The operator picked up and asked me the nature of my emergency. I was relieved to hear the woman's voice sounded nothing like the previous one. Hers was a vaguely southern accent, like a rest stop diner waitress. "Hi," I stuttered. "I just wanted to." I started feeling silly the moment I tried to put the experience into words. How to explain the intangible? How to boil down 1,000 fears into a handful of sentences? I don't know if I'm calling the right number, to be honest. What seems to be the problem? I was just running by the pond, Emerson Pond. The words gave me chills now. There was someone there who looked suspicious. As the word slipped from my mouth, I wanted to slap myself for saying it. Suspicious. Why was I so embarrassed to tell the operator the truth? Was I afraid of being mocked? Ridiculed? Called crazy by someone I'd never met? I'm home now, I added for some reason. The operator did her best to extract the information from me, but she had her work cut out for her. Can you describe the person you saw? She asked. Ulcers, infections, rotten eggs, burnt meat, and undercooked fish. Flies buzzing in bile. Neglected sewers of an ancient city teeming with... I'm sorry, I couldn't see her face, I replied. It was a woman. I think so. I didn't see what she was wearing. I'm really sorry. That's perfectly all right. The operator was patient with me, professional and thorough. But when I hung up a few minutes later, with her promising a patrol car would be sent around to investigate, I didn't believe the woman had any such intent. It was a long night, made longer because I didn't sleep a minute of it. As the clocks in the house ticked on like centipede legs, I lay in bed with my eyes open. I stared at the television on the opposite wall, and yet I had no idea what was playing or even in what language the thing had been broadcast. The only images in my mind came from the memories of Emerson Pond, poorly recollected moments of anxiety and disgust. But memory, oh sweet Sam, memory is no better. When the sun came up for air, I took a shower and called the office to let them know I wouldn't be coming in. I made up something about being up all night throwing up, which was as close to the truth as they were going to get out of me. They only gave me a little grief, being that I rarely called out, and I'm sure I must have sounded terrible after the night I'd had. A lack of sleep wasn't the real reason I called out, however. I'd pulled all-nighters before and gone to work fine the next day. I have that in me. The real reason was that halfway through the night, I decided to return to the pond, to the place with the black gazebo, to see the face in the trees. It was a crazy idea, and I knew it. I had no delusions otherwise. However, I knew my mind wouldn't allow me to move on until I cleared up the mystery of exactly what had happened to me. I have that in me as well. A drive that drives me mad. A longing to know the deeper and the darker. I'd thought of going back with someone, safety in numbers and whatnot, but I gave up on the idea when I realized there was no one to go with me. I have one sibling, a sister who lives nearby who always has a newborn to worry about. All of my friends are casual acquaintances at best, no one I'm really comfortable calling on unannounced, let alone dragging into my unfolding nightmare. It's a thought I don't like to dwell on. The loneliness. The fact that the only people I speak to are coworkers I tolerate and a mother who tolerates me. And so I decided the next safest move was to go back to the pond during the day when more people were around. When the sun is out, the shadows keep fewer secrets. The pond looked harmless in the day, lit by the glow of the summer sun and moved softly by a cooling breeze. It could almost be mistaken for a peaceful place. A place where nothing awful happens. A simple pond where things don't peek out from the brush and call out with a whisper-wet voice. A few people were walking its trail that day, seniors mostly, on account of it being a work day. A group of ducks was even making the most of the good weather. They splashed and quacked and bobbed for small fish at the center of the pond, as if they weren't the most ridiculous of God's inventions. I walked slowly but steadily along the path. Accustomed to visiting it at night, I was surprised to see how much sunlight filtered through the canopy of leaves and lit up the dirt path. Yet it was tainted to me, stained dark by the events of the previous night. And even where the sun touched it, the earth seemed cold and drained of blood. I caught sight of it as I rounded the bend. The gazebo was an organized pile of old wood, chewed on by termites and worn down by rain. It had seemed quaint to me once, a relic of simpler days. Now it was a hornet's nest that glistened with wood pulp and saliva. Carefully, as if my eyes might become trapped by too long a look, I glimpsed at the place in the trees where I'd seen that vile face the night before. My mind attempted to make shapes where there were none, assembling the various shadows and branches into silhouettes. A false recognition of patterns. A bad puzzle solver shoving pieces together that didn't fit. The truth was, There was nothing there. No silhouette, no grinning nightmare face. Just trees and brush and the vines that choke them. Emboldened by the simple signs of nature, I approached the place in the trees that had wholly occupied my thoughts since my last visit. It wasn't enough to see it from a distance. I needed to fully remove all doubt from my mind if I was to return to my life with a clear conscience and a satisfied curiosity. What ground I could see was normal enough, the usual layers of old fallen leaves and bits of bramble and rock that covered much of the property surrounding Emerson Pond. The most shocking thing there was an ant carrying a half-dead moth on its back, a proud offering to queen and colony alike. There was also a strange smell permeating the air. A lingering dampness seemed to have settled over the ground there. The sweet remnants of decomposition, perhaps from some long-gone animal that had crawled into the brush to die alone, the way some do. At least, I hoped that was the explanation. Even then, as I tried to convince myself of the story I'd invented, I felt the rising tide of pain in the depths of my skull. I could tell the headache was going to be particularly bad. The air, so ripe with decay, grew thick with a metallic smell of blood, and the trees pitched and swam and reached for me with crooked arms. I felt the sensation of wind on my face, and then the taste of grass, and then finally, nothing. Gently, lovingly, my mother stroked my hair. I was safe in her arms, and the headache was gone. She knew just how to coax me to sleep, a deep sleep that eased my pain and took away all tension and doubt. Cradled in protective arms like a small child or a baby, my eyes shot open to the cancer that held me, a face of slipping sludge, a crown of bloodied hands and insect mandibles sucking sewer. Great eyes held me in their bruised stare, a mouth like a puncture wound, open to smile down at me, 1,000 tongues sliding over broken bone. Welcome back, Sam Stewart of Marigold Street. My legs didn't work, wouldn't work. I gripped and clawed and crawled away, dragging useless feet behind me, calling for help with a hoarse, itching throat. It was night, and the shadows had returned. They can't hear you, the voice in the trees bubbled. They couldn't remember if they did. I squeezed and beat my legs to feel something, to no effect. I spun to face it. The face hadn't moved, and yet I feared it no less. Unseen fingers pressed into my skull like a child dipping into finger paints. I squinted tightly, trying to force them out, but they only wormed their way farther in. "What are you?" I asked. "What do you want from me?" "You returned to me." The voice bled. I heard a baby. I need to know if it's..." The word died in my throat, as if saying it aloud would make it true. Just the thought alone was unbearable, and the shadowy fingers shivered inside my skull. "Why didn't you tell them?" it asked. "Who?" "The police. The call you made when you got home. Why didn't you tell them about the child?" My eyes fell to my dead legs. I didn't think they'd believe me. A laugh came. "No, sweet Sam, you were scared to tell them what you'd done." I blinked tears away. "What does that mean? What are you talking about?" "You brought her to me, just like you brought the others." "I don't." Before I could protect myself from the assault, faces began flashing through my mind, each one like heat lightning searing my eyes. Men and women alike, fed stories and lured into the woods. Children pulled from the street and dragged from their homes. Babies taken from... "Stop it!" I felt as if my vocal cords would tear, and yet I wasn't sure I'd even made a sound. The strings in my mind were being played so masterfully, so brutally. I wasn't sure of anything at all, not even the things I said. "Do you want their name, Sam Stewart?" the voice teased. "This is a trick, like a phone call. You're making this up, making me see things that aren't there." "I didn't invent anything, Sam Stewart. You did. You called the police almost a year ago now. I just made you remember it. I help you to remember, and I help you to forget. Sometimes you wake up, sometimes you run, but you always come back." I shook my head fiercely. "No, I don't believe you." "You don't have to. Soon you'll forget everything you've heard here, everything you've seen, even my pretty face. You'll go back to your dollhouse and your dull life as if nothing happened. But one night soon, you'll come back to me. You'll come back and give me what I need. And I will take your offering, as well as your pain, and I will swallow them both." There's no way I could forget this. You will. You have. Your sister recently had a child, did she not? My stomach twisted, a spiral of dread pulling at my center. No, a newborn, so young, so sweet, never. My toes twitched and nodded as the face moved forward from the trees. Wet shadows burst and bled, pouring toward me like a lanced boil, thick black hunger and hatred. A million years of decay washed over the grass and dirt and the things that crawled and died in them. A jolt of horror shot through my body with such intensity I felt it in my crippled legs. You say many things, Sam Stewart, yet you think others. You hate your sister. You hate your child. Your mother always preferred her over you, until she died, that is. My legs, alive again, kicked out at the drowning shadows, and then I was up and running. Lungs burning, air. Unblinking eyes peeled wide as my chest rose and fell, feet running on dirt and then concrete as I left the pond and the nightmares behind. I felt fingers draw out of my skull and take something with them. My feet pounded the cooling blacktop as I pushed myself hard, running toward home. House after house, street after street. By the time I got home, my headache was gone and my heart rate had leveled out. Another good run in the books. I'd run that path around the pond so many times I barely noticed it anymore. But then, I suppose that's just how things are. We forget so much more than we remember. I had the feeling I'd forgotten to do something, but the feeling soon passed. I took a shower and got ready for bed, knowing I would sleep well after such a strenuous run. I have a good life. It's a bit lonely sometimes, but it's good. I have a sister who I see every so often. She had a child once, a girl, but it didn't live long. At least my mother wasn't around by then to bear that heartache. The only complaint I have is the headaches. Some days I get them, some days I don't. But a good run always makes me feel better in the end. There's a pond nearby I like to visit, with a nice path and an old black gazebo nestled in with the trees. That's where I go when I need to feel better. My own special place. On a hot night in August, with my head splitting open, I went for a run. There's a story I need to tell. This seems as good a place as any. It happened at the Devil's Elbow. The Devil's Elbow is a jagged peak that juts up from a ridge in the Sierra foothills. It's in the southern part of the state, not far from where the mountains give way to the desert. There's a rounded rise further down the ridge that people call Hip Hill. When viewed from the proper angle, it resembles a man lying on his side with his bent elbow poking up. That's how it got its name. Well, that and the reputation the area has. Not many people venture up the slopes of the Devil's Elbow, and of those that do, not all of them come back. I've lived around here most of my life. Our family was from Darby, about 20 miles down the highway, but my parents owned a cabin on Maggie's Folly Road, a 2-lane state route that winds its way up a broad canyon near the base of Devil's Elbow. That's where I lived, in the cabin, although calling it a cabin is a little misleading. The rough timber and fieldstone construction gave it a rustic look, but it had indoor plumbing, electricity, a hot tub, and even broadband. Most of the other cabins along the road were the same. It was the kind of place where people with money built vacation homes. I may not have amounted to much in the eyes of some, but my parents did pretty well for themselves. Maybe that money-making gene skips a generation. Aside from having lived there for the better part of the last 5 years, I spent most of my summers at the cabin when I was growing up. I may not have heard all of the tales, but I know most of them. Strange sounds, strange tracks, strange occurrences. My older brother Brad once told me about the time he went out on a search party with our dad looking for a missing hiker. I was too young to go along, and he kind of lorded that over me. But when they came back, he wasn't so smug anymore. He told me the story that night, whispering down from the top bunk. He said they were only a few hundred yards up the slope of the Devil's Elbow when the sheriff's deputy leading their party raised his hand for everyone to stop. He asked if anyone heard anything. Nobody did, at all. There was no birdsong, no crickets chirping, no cicadas whirring. He said everybody was really weirded out by it. All of a sudden, the members of the search party, most of them seasoned hunters and outdoorsmen, got panicky and scared. The deputy decided they'd gone far enough and should move on to the next search sector. Nobody argued. I lay awake most of that night wondering what might be up on that mountain. But by the next day, I was pretty sure Brad was just yanking my chain. Since then, I've never put much stock in the tall tales and campfire stories people told about the Devil's Elbow. That was until the fire. I got a text ordering evacuation a little after 3 in the afternoon. I would have missed it if my phone wasn't set to vibrate. I always keep my phone on vibrate. There's no way I'd ever hear a ringtone or notification chime over all the noise in the shop. The winds had shifted. According to the alert, the wildfire had turned west, crossing the Devil's Elbow Ridge, and was burning out of control, straight for the canyon where I lived with my girlfriend. I immediately stepped out onto the loading dock to call her. "Chloe, did you get the evacuation message?" I asked when she picked up. "Oh yeah, I left about a couple hours ago. People were saying the fire was going to turn, so I didn't wait." "So you're in town? Where are you staying?" Actually, I'm at Gary's." "What?" Gary was her ex. One of those corporate flunkies with an office in the city, soft hands and a closet full of silk shirts and Italian loafers. He and Chloe had remained friends after their breakup. She even had him up to dinner at my place a couple of times, just to show how mature and adult we all were. Normally, I'm not the jealous type, but their chumminess didn't sit right with me. "I thought we agreed we'd stay in town if we had to evacuate," I said. Darby was what they call a bedroom community, maybe a 45-minute drive from the city, situated in the desert. It had a main drag lined with upscale boutiques and restaurants, surrounded by gated communities. On the outskirts of town were a couple of strip malls for the regular folk, 2 chain motels, and Reggie's Rods and Chops, the custom car and motorcycle shop where I worked as a machinist. Most of the hot rods, muscle cars, and choppers we built wound up as little more than lawn ornaments for rich people, but I can't complain. It's a pretty good living. You want me to stay in some cheesy Best Western or Comfort Inn? I can't even. You know I have anxiety. I need to be someplace familiar. She was almost in tears. That always got me. We could hash things out later. Gary had one of those fake haciendas, all tile and stucco. The place reminded me of a 90s-era Taco Bell. It was in a new development near the edge of the desert, far enough away from the wooded foothills below the Devil's Elbow to be safe. Okay, I said. We'll figure it out. But what about Dizzy?" Gary was not fond of my dog. "Oh." "What do you mean, oh?" "David, I'm so sorry. I forgot her." "You left my dog in a forest fire?" "Don't shout at me. I was so scared." The fire was coming, and there was so much smoke, and I was rushing to get away, and you know I have anxiety. I don't know what other excuses she gave because I hung up, leapt off the loading dock, and sprinted for my Jeep. You have to understand, Dizzy is pretty important to me. Dizzy is some kind of pit bull mix, black with a white bib, mismatched eyes, and at around 30 pounds on the small side. She has scars on her snout, and half her left ear is missing, which leads me to believe she was used as bait by dog fighters. She came to me at a pretty low point in my life. It was about 5 years ago. I'd just gone through a messy divorce and had been laid off from the factory where I worked at the time. My dad had lost his battle with cancer the year before. Mom had just passed away herself. I think she died of a broken heart. Sounds sappy, I know, but I'm pretty sure it's true. My brother got the big house in Darby, and I got the cabin in the canyon because my parents knew us well and wanted us to be happy. I was on my way out of the city after signing the papers at the lawyer's office to take possession of the cabin when I saw the sign for the animal rescue. I'm not sure why I turned in there. When people ask, I always say, I figured a guy who lived in a cabin is a guy who should have a dog. That's not true. It's just something I made up so I'd have an answer to a question I didn't have an answer for. Whatever the reason, I pulled into the shelter and told the woman behind the counter that I wanted a dog. She told me I was in luck. They had plenty. There were lots of purebred labs, retrievers, and collies, Dogs that had been Christmas gifts when they were puppies and then dumped at the shelter when they got big and the kids lost interest. I'm sure they were great dogs. All of them seemed friendly enough, but I didn't really click with any of them. I was about to thank the woman for her time and head out when she said they had one more. She didn't sound hopeful, but I said I'd look at it just to be polite. That's when I met Dizzy. She didn't take to me right away, just kind of hid behind the shelter lady with her head hung low. I got a couple of treats from the jar on the counter and managed to get her to take them from my hand. Once she had the treat in her mouth, though, she'd run back behind the shelter lady to gobble it down. Dizzy had been confiscated from her previous owner by animal control and had been in the shelter for more than 2 years. She was a bully breed, mostly black, probably about 3 years old, had different colored eyes, scars, and a missing ear. The only thing that would have made her less adorable was if she had horns and cloven hooves, according to the shelter lady. Right about the time she was explaining that to me, Dizzy let me give her a quick scratch. She wagged her tail. It was only 2 or 3 times, but that's all it took. You could have stuck a fork in me because I was done. The only question I had was, how much? Turns out you can't just hand them some money and walk away with a dog. There's an application and a background check. I even had to give references. It took 2 weeks to get approved. While I waited, I made a trip to the shelter every day. They were open to take Dizzy for a walk or play fetch every day. When they brought her out of her kennel, she'd get so excited when she saw me that she'd spin in circles until she couldn't walk straight. The day the adoption was official, I changed her name to Dizzy. The shelter staff had called her Edna. That just wasn't going to work. It was just the 2 of us for the next couple of years. We settled into the cabin. I got hired at Reggie's. Life was good. It was the first time in a long time that I felt like I wasn't just going through the motions. Then along came Chloe. That was good too, at first. Things started to get a little iffy when she moved in with us. Chloe had opinions that she didn't mind sharing. She didn't think animals should be kept as pets. It was demeaning to their intrinsic nobility and symbolic of neocolonialism. She would tell me stories she'd read somewhere, she couldn't remember where, about how dangerous pit bulls were, that they could lock their jaws, about how sometimes they just snapped for no reason and mauled innocent little children. I knew all of that was BS, but it was easier not to argue. At one point, she asked me what I would say if she told me she wouldn't marry me unless I got rid of Dizzy. The thought that popped into my head was, who said anything about marriage? Instead, I told her that Dizzy would probably only live for another 8 or 10 years. If we were still together, we could get married then. That did not go over well. Chloe packed her bags. She made it as far as the front porch before she had a panic attack and collapsed. For her part, Dizzy didn't seem to care much for Chloe either. She never got aggressive or anything. She just ignored her. In all honesty, I can't think of anything that would piss Chloe off more than just being ignored. Coming up out of the desert and approaching the foothills, I could see a couple of highway patrol cruisers on the road ahead, blocking the turnoff to Maggie's Folly. They would never let me pass. Not to rescue a dog. But there was an old cutoff just to the south, not much more than a rutted dirt track through the desert. It followed the top of a low bluff before turning east into a draw that would eventually lead to the canyon road a couple of miles below my cabin. My Jeep was beefed up from stock, one of the advantages of working in a custom vehicle shop. But even with the engine and suspension modifications I'd made, it would be slow going. The sky was already darkening with smoke. I could see the orange glow of the wildfire coming down the backside of the Devil's Elbow Ridge. It was moving fast. With no other choice, I threw the transfer case into 4x4 high and wheeled onto the cutoff. The fat off-road tires sprayed plumes of dust into the air. There was no way the cops didn't see me, but there was no way they could stop me either. I pushed my Jeep as fast as I dared, slamming over ruts and rocks, worried the whole time I might break an axle. Halfway along the bluff, I could actually look down on Gary's place. sitting at the end of a cul-de-sac lined with empty lots. He was very proud that his was the first home in that section of the development. It was a good ways off, and I was being thrown against my seatbelt hard enough to rattle my teeth. But I thought I could make out two figures reclining on lounge chairs by the pool. I couldn't believe it. She abandoned my dog to die in a wildfire, and now she's relaxing poolside, sipping mojitos with her ex-boyfriend. Once I turned into the draw, the going got tougher. I had to shift into 4 low. The cutoff was more overgrown than I remembered. Low-hanging spruce branches slapped against the windshield, cracking the glass and scraping down the sides of my Wrangler. More than once, the skid plate slammed against a rock or root with a jarring blow. I had to be careful. Lots of animals were fleeing the fire. Several times, mule deer and whitetails jumped out onto the trail in front of me. I even spotted a couple of elk bawling their way downhill through the underbrush. My tires spun, caught, lurched forward, and spun again, making my progress nightmarishly slow. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I ignored it, concentrating on keeping the Jeep upright and moving forward. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity twice over, I broke into the clear and turned onto the smooth asphalt of Maggie's Folly. I floored the gas pedal. It was a little after 5 according to the dashboard clock, and sunset at that time of year was just before 7. But when I whipped into my driveway, slewing sideways on the loose gravel, the smoke was so thick it might as well have been midnight. Ash drifted down from the sky like an early snow. I took the porch steps 3 at a time, fumbling my keys twice before I managed to get the door open. Dizzy should have been right there. She always knows when I pull in the driveway. She always greets me at the door, spinning in circles until she can't walk straight. "Dizzy!" I shouted. "Come on, girl!" Nothing. The cabin's lower level has an open floor plan. I could see she wasn't downstairs. Up on the second floor, I checked the bedrooms, closets, bathroom, and under the beds. I couldn't find my dog. The only place left was outside. I'd told Chloe 100 times never to let Dizzy outside by herself. The canyon wasn't wilderness, but it was close. There were coyotes, bobcats, bears, maybe even some wolves and mountain lions. Dizzy wasn't big enough to take on a pack of coyotes, let alone a wolf or a cougar. I dashed out the back door. Heat hit me like a fist in the face. The yard was empty. "Dizzy!" I shouted, then immediately doubled over in a coughing fit. The smoke was thick. The fire was no longer an orange glow in the distance. I could see flames through the trees. "Dizzy!" I shouted again, running to the edge of the woods. More coughing racked me so hard I vomited. I heard something moving through the brush. It wasn't Dizzy. Whatever it was big and moving fast. Branches snapped like gunfire. Trees swayed. A cold, hard panic gripped my heart as I backed away. Maybe 20 yards into the trees, I saw motion. Just a blur, really, but bigger than any bare air I'd ever seen. I kept backing away until I thumped against my storage shed. That's when I heard the low whining. "Dizzy?" I dropped to the ground, peering into the gap under the shed's floor. No dog. I ran around to the other side. She wasn't there. There was a weak yip. It came from inside. I kept the key on a hook beside the kitchen door, but there was no time to run back and get it. Instead, I shoved my fingers through the gap between the double doors and yanked. It took 3 good hard pulls with everything I had before the hasp screws ripped out of the wood. Inside, Dizzy was cowering in the back corner, panting and hacking from the smoke. When she saw me, she trotted to the door and tried to spin around, but there wasn't enough oxygen in the air. She fell over. I scooped her up into my arms and ran for my Jeep as fast as my burning lungs would allow. The roof of my cabin was smoldering. I could see the glow of burning trees further down the canyon. The fire had flanked us, and we were in danger of being cut off. I began to realize that we might not make it out of here. Back in the Jeep, with the windows closed, the air was slightly more breathable. Dizzy seemed to perk up a little. I jammed the transmission into gear, wheeled around, and sped down as fast as I could. In the smoke and darkness, heat battered us. Flaming embers sparked off the hood and windshield. I babbled prayers to a God I wasn't sure existed. 3 miles along, just when I started to think we might make it, A fallen tree, blazing so hotly the asphalt beneath it bubbled, blocked the road. I screamed incoherently, beating the steering wheel with my fist. Dizzy put her front paws on my thigh and licked my face. I wrapped her in my arms and began to cry. How long had Chloe been locking her in the shed? Why would she do that? Dizzy panted and whined in my arms. The heat had become almost unbearable. At least Dizzy wasn't going to die alone. Then it hit me. The cutoff. The fire hadn't advanced as far down on the other side of the canyon. It might still be clear. "We're getting out of here, girl," I assured my dog as much as myself. I whipped the Jeep around again, heading back up the hill. In the smoke and darkness, I missed the turn and had to reverse back down the road for 50 yards or so, plunging the Jeep back into the trees. We jounced over the same ruts, rocks, and roots that had nearly rattled me to pieces on the way up. Dizzy splayed her feet on the passenger seat, trying to steady herself. My phone vibrated again. I ignored it. Again. We were maybe 3/4 of a mile down the draw, with the fire closing in fast from behind, when the thing stepped out onto the track in front of us. I slammed the brakes. Dizzy slipped off the seat and fell into the passenger's footwell. It was tall, 15 feet at least, towering over my Jeep, and walked upright. Its body was emaciated, mottled gray skin stretched drum-tight over its bones. Tufts of mangy fur hung from its shoulders. The hands were enormous, each gnarled finger tipped with a hooked claw. Its head was elongated and crowned with antlers. In its mouth were row after row of crooked, needle-like teeth. It leaned forward, peering at me through the windshield with eyes that glowed a dull yellow. I felt that cold, hard panic grip my heart again. Blood turned to ice water in my veins. Dizzy jumped into my lap, planting her front paws on the steering wheel, snarling and barking at the thing like I'd never heard her before. Just then, a tree exploded to the right of the track. The heat of the flames had boiled off the pine resin in the trunk, turning it into an expanding gas that blew the tree apart like a grenade. Chunks of wood pelted the side of my Jeep, dimpling the sheet metal and making spiderwebs in the safety glass. Jagged splinters sprayed the creature. It snorted in irritation before striding off into the trees on the left. I sat frozen in terror until the brightening glow in my rearview mirror drew my eye. The flames were speeding up behind us. I released the brake, stomping on the gas. Dizzy jumped back into the passenger seat as the Jeep leapt forward and we careened downhill. The rest of that trip down the draw was a blur. I have snatches of memory, of lurching painfully hard against my seatbelt, of Dizzy whining in fear as she was thrown around in the passenger's footwell, of wanting to give her a reassuring pat but not being able to take my hands off the wheel. I do remember emerging from the last bit of scrub into the open desert and the fire burning out just behind us. I drove along the top of the bluff for a bit before I had to stop. The sun had set. Moonlight washed the desert, turning it into a black and white photograph. The air there was much cooler and free of smoke. Stepping out of the Jeep, I drank it in deep. I plopped down on the edge of the bluff, pulling Dizzy into my lap and scratching her behind the ears. My phone vibrated in my pocket. This time I answered it. "David?" Chloe nearly shouted. "Where the hell are you? Why'd you lock Dizzy in the shed?" What are you talking about? I went to get Dizzy. She was locked in the shed. You locked her in the shed. Have you been doing this every day when I go to work? You went to get your stupid dog? I've been calling and calling. Why didn't you answer? I was worried sick. You know I have anxiety. What would have happened to me if you died? I could hear splashes in the background. From where I sat, I could see the lights of Gary's house. Something else caught my eye. "David, are you listening to me?" "No," I said. "Not really. You care more about that dumb mutt than you do about me. You wouldn't have run into a forest fire to save my life." "You weren't locked in a shed," I growled. "That dog is dangerous. She gets really mean with me when you're not around. I have to put her in the shed when you're gone. She even bit me once." "She never bit you. You would have told me if she had." "Are you calling me a liar?" "Yeah, I guess I am," I said, squinting my eyes. It was a ways off, but I was pretty sure I knew what it was. "You know what? Gary's right. You need to make a choice, me or the dog. I'll take Dizzy. She stayed on the line long enough to curse me out and tell me she never wanted to speak to me again before hanging up. I thought about calling her back, warning her. But what was the point? She would have just laughed at me. The three-quarter moon was bright enough for me to see the beast slouching off across the desert floor toward the lights of Gary's hacienda. I guess some of those campfire stories were true after all. According to the tales I'd heard, it would be hungry. They were always hungry. We needed to get out of there before it turned its attention to us. Dizzy and I loaded up and limped what was left of my Jeep back to Darby. The police came to talk to me a week or so later. Chloe's sister had reported her missing. I didn't even know she had a sister. I told them the truth. Most of it, anyway. They found her car and her possessions at Gary's place. Gary was missing too. Turns out he was embezzling money from his firm. The police figure he and Chloe ran off to Mexico together. The cabin was a total loss, so I stayed with my brother until the insurance company settled up. Dizzy and I got ourselves a little bungalow in one of the more affordable sections of Darby. I like it here. I like working at Reggie's, and Dizzy took a real shine to Brad's kids, so it's nice to be nearby. I suppose I could have rebuilt the cabin if I'd wanted. A lot of the residents did just that. But this is as close to the devil's elbow as I care to go. Thank you very much. I'm just now at the point where I can sleep most nights without dreaming of those eyes, glowing dull yellow. Maybe I should have tried to warn Chloe. Maybe I should have told her that a Wendigo fleeing a wildfire on the devil's elbow was headed straight for her. Of course she wouldn't have believed me. But maybe I should have tried anyway. Does it make me a bad person that I didn't? I don't know. All I do know is that she shouldn't have tried to get between me and my dog. I hear you light the fire. Which one is the West School mod? Add video. Schoolman flash adjusting. Your dance is in my heart. Hugo's punishment is my wish and help. You really show gratefulness. Surprise eats food. Initially, help file word. What's the phrase? Speed incoming fire. Triple jump record. The Windlord. How and Yuri extinguishing sport. Main purpose for my shoes in white. Happy with my father wants more. Smokin' Swain. What's more? Prizes and cash, tourists in itself, and Play Store in the sky. Anywhere, and round to get more. File word search, outsource. Printing for the loss of I didn't either of person to all my friends. My aunt and I want in the dots. iPhone is love. Rangers, Mystic Dreamerland, where these memories place. I will write their favorite stations are met. My favorite season. The sweetness makes us. Some people just like the causes, treatments, events. Yemen. D each other. Instruments, dosage play a part in sports. Attic and price for any way of payment and helping location and the nearest port. Hip world of paper, responsible person, and over 100 Halloween can draw. The other supports the woodsman and the rain. With my parents, we're near future of memory store. Cho Android 2.2 start. Jennifer, my last thing, which makes this was my first time. Have installed the world, and when the pictures and take is most cities in the act of that meet contemplation. I swear my back of my soul in forestry. Word search output, my hands. Wellness, eastern part of it. Never felt food, and just when you're paced with Saigon. 3. You have to lose my cares for you. Now that we're ready. Penis, my first days. Delta time. Bruxelles tomorrow. The first night with school, but not for the wind. The wish come together. Splash resistant, ethnic about my space on the complete all day. Enthusiastic to Innisfree is down. Our countries are inserted in cool raw, very cold, and ask me and sustainable sense of trade. All right, now she come. Wool's day and that smell and the flash. The weather plays with snow of what is helping me. What you nigh momentarily. Pearl test I peek and say that I can see you want to feel. Afraid of any personal one goal and face my say. We're filled with notes and wish a drawing animal. The 3 performance as good. The ordinances ase tayo gansa, resistant to 3 hours in everything. Dare have enough for us to be completely nung want and defend your address. Minecraft now vaka kept me dangwan and bring myself an adjustable speed. And when my world is in treatment and wash soap API, my heart stop. English teacher would take. What subjects do you so much the world with similar position and late? I want that inside the public consultation with you. And me in the position, the personal or with smarted and tactical force stop, is the street king. Lineage inspection Troshide helper advancement has had my chance. I'd rather she would continue for your sweat, no strain. The cards, I spent my nights handside and stay away. The sole EV princess undersea Superman. The dog's out more punishment in that Ling Wu regards, and articles lacking her personal afford to see well because you decide. Fee Jim alarm, and you'd seen my money back to normal. IP scanner for my love have and tape and robots. Will replace Star World. Kauhai three-way cup world afford the time now, and you are my life. You've spent more night with Ninja Pro. I hate me that my heart and soul and an amazing sketches. Mucinous, a process my three in their hands and find the wind that I love. Tara Dei, I could be your light particles and lights, and I've got some have to wear glasses. Are often decorated, and the first time past since there are the screen and the fire, when he lost in the cause. This is the weather my soul. I against our sight and respond to the wild. Night, the far right hand, which all the guests to sleep. And I have people, the compact mode. The word you, my side with show of Enti Pearl. I have my money market, your work. Well, I have my sunshine in the rain. In turn around and would be conscious that let our customers jump around as I am with you. On, you're out together. Bite, net password has traveled. Open the forest, Nadella my hand. Come in contact with objects that let my phone. It were unusually smooth and right protect. No size is hard on another and tensions. And I hold you and hoping these people come on fine. Acrylamide Aventry. I'm able to find my tracks. Are you appreciate my hearts and ecology and common? For instance, where are you? That people person. I was such an all we know me. When you're like a white essence against you. My time dual brush and for traditional pen. Apple Navatli QWERTY Mouse Superway. My address and between the witness spot. Essence Innisfree and well-trained affirming the Shikra. Well, come with instant our National Geographic. What's the first honest with the cover of age is the best restaurant food stalls. Espadrilles agreements with words and stood Amelia. When a small island score goals in work is and research associate over complete sin. Sense of great war of money advancement and treatment. The smallest bit more explorist. I'm black, the fastest and worth it. A Google Apple Fatrian Chomesao. National against foreign legion. I want. To format and fastest typist. A standard entity and tries. I see it is installed in 3 great and read as it is very sweet. Perinatal body intelligence skin with message and some other 3 hours. He arrived as the stress of God. I thought was possible on the strip. Spend his hand that more English and even more friends with single. For more info, for speed goes the weasel. Public port scanning for days. It twisted something more is the body. The body me sink. I had a very nice, I will sell your neighbor helped us. I was told the dentist. My first morning, my body. One more icons for such a witness. The ethnic Jinsei Trajenta stance Isovalorate Nungvat. News in their fight. I can think of this moment is made. It is displayed. Ghosts and great wall. My precious life becomes. I have nice picture is paid out of friend's world. No more live stream and treatment for hair. Steakhouse of the world, and the sands of my latest news for our training artwork. Kongwinqua Happy Kid Wayfarer. Prison officials are happy birthday. Val Jinga Green Nest. Like its body wash. Old friend, a sweet to so far is in use. The force I can see more. She calls and fold for the reason. That is at least Fav Schwedagon over every word you go. I have Asimov Nars orgasm. And Mina, people must megastar weekend. I need to the season destroyed and find. There's nowhere. The house is damaged. Nawatni fate has, for they had to describe the make more time for a short whispered in the middle of a vanished right way. Through the pulse refresh rate is installed. The kid is connected in system or just when the face cornice, Hontalu's sparkles and WordPress examples are good wine and brutal for the work. Sentai the money, you wine teen insta animal moments in your right people and where your friends are used. Growl Ixo Makita person of awareness. almost human right Leicestershire. My workforce trader tourists in West and the lake resort phase. I would almost human existence of gold and the world that it want me. Friends with me with national velvet bosses some. How tall is used, everything on with me. This is responsible in the moment. Equestria. Intangible truth is I can see baby you, till my chances that little hands are attempting to tell me what is the trees. Kai Internet and iPhone is not supported in my fashion for my special. In my chest and I made of peace and tell my. From get inducted into their nest is going in official download. Wonder Woman scream the kindest regards. Sunspace dress the result is not match. Icons automatically shut my chest. Warface my God, my prayer with new benevolence investments in your mouth with just like is there is nothing. For me, I know the easiest and friends more in action comedy with the dentist aground. Find out our exam essentials in my high-K Amazon IP mousepad. I seen on the way and price time is for the verge. Shake my vision Vietnamese. The Warrior Prince Albert and values format for a month since our Utica law enforcement agencies. I waited for impression on the gods of the most people. Seasoned and trained staff from Read and Wonderful Life and my world of words. 6V model Sumi's heart away to promise that we're used on the way. The hospital is restricted for it will always be. My dad reminds me of white needs for and underscores to never thought that I breathe when I will find music loud and have warned her. Makes sense.
This is a story that my mother and aunt told me when I was in high school. I'm 21 now, and it has never left me. I think about it constantly and ponder over what happened. My grandfather passed away in June of 2020, close to a year ago. He was 96 when he died, and his death caused some issues in the family. These issues don't directly pertain to the story, but there are certain things about him that I need to share to explain the story in the best possible way. My grandfather, John, was a man who was extremely calloused and old-fashioned. He was bitter, abusive, and a complete macho man. My mother was raised to never show emotion or pain due to his abuse and lack of compassion. He was also an extreme racist. After his death, many family secrets began to surface. Everything that happened around him was brushed off and forgotten because he always had more important things to do, like drinking and having affairs. He was an intense, no-nonsense type of man. He was not religious at all and considered things like faith and hope to be stupid. The story takes place sometime in the 1970s, most likely the early to mid-70s. My mom was born in 1965 and remembers this story very clearly. My aunts remember it as well, but can't pinpoint the exact year. One summer day, John decided to take his family on a small outing for a picnic in the woods. My mother, her 3 sisters, and my grandmother were all there and excited about it. Where we're from, my family is accustomed to the woods, having lived in the area for generations. Going into the woods for a family activity was nothing out of the ordinary and seemed like just another normal day. They drove down a dirt backwoods road and stopped when they found a clearing large enough to accommodate them. The kids eagerly jumped out of the car and began playing after being cooped up during the drive. Meanwhile, my grandmother started unloading their food and picnic supplies. John surveyed the area to decide where to set up. As he was doing so, something in the woods beyond the clearing caught his eye. Before heading off to check it out, he yelled to the family, saying he'd be right back. Neither my grandmother nor the kids thought much of this since they were all familiar with the woods, and these particular woods were no exception. They continued unloading and setting up their things. Suddenly, one of the girls noticed something unusual in the clearing. It was a dirt mound, roughly the size of a small person, possibly even child-sized. It was too large to be an animal, especially since the woods in that area only had small animals like squirrels and raccoons. Scattered on the mound were large river rocks, which had been placed there intentionally, though not in any particular pattern. The dirt looked fresh, darker, and looser than the surrounding ground, as though it had just been dug up. The atmosphere shifted immediately from a fun day to something much darker. My grandmother became concerned and told the girls to stay away from it, Although she tried to stay calm and focus on the picnic, she was clearly unsettled. The children, being young, didn't share her level of worry and continued playing, avoiding the mound but carrying on as usual. The day seemed to return to normal briefly, with the girls chasing each other and laughing again. However, the sense of unease lingered. The trees around them created a dense wall of foliage, blocking their view of the deeper woods. Then, another of the girls spotted something else, this time hanging from a tree branch. It was a noose, tied high above their heads. While a dirt mound could potentially be explained away by nature, someone had to have placed that noose there. My grandmother froze when she saw it. Something was very wrong. They couldn't just leave because John was still in the woods. Even the children, who were too young to fully understand its implications, recognized the noose as a symbol of death. Anxiety began to spread through the group. Trying to maintain calm, my grandmother told the children it must have been left by deer hunters. However, deep down, she knew no sane hunter would hang a deer and then bury it. Her unease grew even stronger when they began hearing something from the woods, a rhythmic chanting. The sound was faint at first, echoing from deep within the trees. It was a deep, droning chant, accompanied by a drum beat, 3 steady beats, followed by a pause, then repeating. The sound grew louder and closer with each passing second. Panic set in as the sound engulfed the clearing, vibrating in their chests like they were at a concert. The chanting seemed to come from all directions, as if the very trees were alive with the noise. Suddenly, John's voice broke through the chanting. He was yelling from the woods, telling them to get in the car. He came running out, his face full of terror. The most emotion anyone had ever seen from him. John, the man who was afraid of nothing, was visibly shaken to his core. My grandmother quickly began throwing their things into the car as the kids scrambled inside. John and my grandmother loaded the car as fast as they could, not caring about organization. Food spilled everywhere, and some items broke, but they didn't stop until everything was inside. Once they were all in the car, they sped away. The main part of the story ends here, but one detail has haunted me ever since. My grandfather never spoke about what he saw in the woods that day. He refused to tell anyone, neither my grandmother nor his children. Anytime the story was brought up, he angrily shut it down and told them never to ask again. He never reported it to the police or spoke of it outside the family. Whatever John saw that day stayed with him until his death. When I first heard the story, I swore to myself that I would ask him about it one day. But now I can't, and I regret it deeply. By the time I was in high school, he had moved out of state to live with other family members, and I lost contact with him apart from the occasional birthday calls or letters. We weren't close, especially as I grew older and learned more about the abuse he caused. I distanced myself from him, but his death still looms over me because of this story. For my mother and aunts, this is just a spooky childhood memory, something to tell around the Thanksgiving table. But for me, it's a mystery that won't let go. I've always been fascinated by the occult, horror, and conspiracy theories, and this story captured my curiosity like no other. This isn't the only strange story from my family, but it's certainly the most unsettling. I wish I had answers, and I hope you find this story as fascinating as I do. In the summer of 1988, my grandmother thought it'd be a good idea for us to go camping. She said I needed to spend more time outdoors instead of sitting inside playing video games. I didn't really mind. She had an old beat-up tent, a rusty lantern, and a cooler packed with sandwiches. This kind of trip was right up her alley, simple and no extras. We drove out to a state park about 2 hours from her house and set up our tent near a lake, in a spot where only a few other people were camping. They were scattered far enough away that it felt like we were alone. The first day was normal. We walked around, checked out some trails, ate sandwiches by the water, and I helped her build a small fire. As the sun went down, the woods around us got dark fast. The trees swallowed up the last bits of light, and soon it was just the fire and the stars. I wasn't used to it being that dark, but my grandmother didn't seem to care. She was a tough woman, never afraid of anything. That night, though, I couldn't sleep. The forest was alive with strange sounds, branches cracking, leaves rustling, and what I swore sounded like footsteps far off in the distance. I kept telling myself it was just animals, but something about it didn't feel right. I lay there for hours, staring up at the inside of the tent, listening to every little noise. My grandmother slept peacefully next to me, breathing slow and steady in her sleeping bag, totally unaware. The next morning I tried to brush it off. I told myself I was just letting my imagination get to me. We spent the day fishing and cooking over the fire, but when the sun went down, the noises came back, and this time, they were closer. I lay in my sleeping bag, my heart racing as I listened to the sounds outside the tent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was out there, watching us from the darkness. By the third night, I was on edge. Every little sound made me jump. I tried to act like it was all in my head, but the feeling wouldn't go away. After we got into our sleeping bags, I lay there trying to calm myself down. Then I heard it again, a soft, slow crunching of leaves right outside the tent. My whole body tensed up. I stopped breathing, straining my ears to listen. The footsteps were slow, almost careful, like whoever it was didn't want to be noticed. They circled around the tent, close enough that I could feel the ground move under me. I didn't dare move. I wanted to wake my grandmother, but I was too scared to even whisper. The footsteps stopped right next to my side of the tent, and for a long moment everything went quiet. Then something pressed against the side of the tent, right where my head was. I felt it drag down slowly, like a hand brushing along the fabric. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might give me away. I lay there frozen, waiting for whatever it was to make its next move. After what felt like forever, the sound of footsteps came back, this time moving away from the tent. I didn't move for a long time, just staring into the darkness, too afraid to close my eyes. I must have eventually passed out from exhaustion, but it wasn't restful. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee. My grandmother was already outside, stirring the fire like nothing had happened. I got dressed quickly and stepped out of the tent, my mind racing, going over everything from the night before. I walked around the tent, looking for any sign of what had been out there. At first, everything seemed normal, just leaves and dirt. But then I saw them. Deep footprints in the ground, much too big to be from any animal. They led from the woods straight to our tent and stopped exactly where I'd felt the pressure on the fabric. But it wasn't the footprints that made my stomach turn. It was the fact that they didn't lead back into the woods. There were no tracks leaving our campsite, just the ones that came in. Something or someone had walked up to our tent and never left. I didn't say anything to my grandmother. We packed up camp and left that morning. I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints on the drive home. No matter how hard I tried to forget, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something had been there with us, watching us. And to this day, every time I think about that night, I wonder where they went, or worse, if they're still out there, following me, waiting for the right time to come back. We were camped out in the middle of nowhere for a training exercise deep in the mountains. It was supposed to be an easy army trip, nothing big. We set up our tents close to the woods where the trees were thick, and the air felt cold. You could smell the pine trees all around us. It was so quiet out there that you could almost forget how far we were from anything. The first night went all right. We did the usual stuff, set up our tents, ate some quick meals, and kept watch around the camp. But by the second night, something didn't feel right. It wasn't the usual feeling of being out in the wild. It was different, like something was off, but I couldn't figure out what. I was on guard duty, walking and looking around the camp, when I started hearing noises. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but it didn't sound like that. It was more like someone or something moving around in the woods, just outside of where the trees started. I looked into the darkness, but I couldn't see anything. The moonlight barely got through the branches, making it tough to see far into the forest. I told myself it was probably just animals. Still, that creepy feeling stuck with me the rest of the night. When my shift ended, I went back to my tent, but I couldn't sleep well. Every time I closed my eyes, it felt like someone was watching me. By the third night, everyone else seemed tense too. No one was saying anything, but I could tell by the way they moved and kept looking at the woods that something was bothering them. The air felt heavier that night, like something was in the woods keeping an eye on us. That night, I heard the noise again. This time, it was closer. I grabbed my gear and stepped out of my tent. Some of the others were already awake, standing by the campfire, looking into the trees. I knew they had heard it too. We all stood still, listening. The sound came again, moving closer. It wasn't an animal. Whatever was out there was bigger, and it was moving slowly like it didn't want us to hear it. My heart was racing as I stared into the trees, trying to see what it was, but I couldn't make out anything. Then behind me I heard something in the bushes. I turned quickly, ready for anything, but there was nothing there. Just the dark woods. Everything had gone quiet again. Too quiet. We didn't sleep that night. We all stayed up, watching and waiting, but nothing else happened. No more sounds, no movement, just silence. By morning, we were worn out, but we had orders to stay another night. We couldn't leave yet. As the sun went down again, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to be worse, and it was. Just after midnight, the noises started again, but this time, they were coming from all around us. Whatever was out there was circling our camp, staying just out of sight. My stomach turned, and I knew this wasn't normal. There was no way it was just animals. Then, there was a loud crash, like something big had hit the ground hard, not far from where we were. I felt my blood run cold. We rushed toward the sound, our flashlights cutting through the dark, but there was nothing. No tracks, no signs of anything. Whatever it was gone. We didn't wait for the morning. We packed up and got out of there before the sun came up, ending the training early. The higher-ups didn't say anything about what happened, just told us to move out. I didn't ask any questions, but I couldn't shake the feeling that they knew something we didn't. Whatever was out there in those woods, it was watching us the whole time, waiting. And I don't think it was just the wind that kept me awake those nights. There was something out there, something real. Something we couldn't see. And I think we left just before it was ready to show itself. Growing up on a farm with over 250 acres of land had its perks: endless space to explore, the freedom to roam, and a sense of solitude that's hard to find anywhere else. At 17 years old, I was no stranger to hard work. My dad ran the place with a firm but fair hand, and I was more than willing to help out wherever I could. One summer evening, Dad mentioned needing some trees cleared in the deepest part of our woods. He offered to pay me well for the job, more than he usually would. The extra cash sounded good at that age. At the time, I had my eye on a used dirt bike that a friend of mine was selling, so I jumped at the opportunity. The next morning, I loaded up the truck with all the necessary gear, packing everything into the sturdy trailer my dad let me borrow. The area he wanted me to clear was a good drive through rough terrain, parts of the property we didn't frequent often. As I set off, the sun hadn't quite set yet, but was well on its way, making our fields look golden. The drive took about half an hour, the path getting narrower and more overgrown as I went deeper. When I made it to the spot, I took a moment to appreciate the serenity. There were tall trees all around, and the wind sounded peaceful. I got to work, the chainsaw roaring to life. The first few trees came down without a hitch. As I moved on to the next, I had the odd sensation of being watched. I paused, cutting the engine and listening closely. There was nothing unusual, just the typical forest sounds. So, for the time being, I shrugged it off and continued my work. A couple of hours later, while taking a break, I noticed something strange. One of the trees I'd felled earlier was missing. That couldn't be right or possible. Trees don't get up and walk away. I headed over to where it should have been, scratching my head. There was the stump, cleanly cut, but the tree itself was gone. I looked around, thinking maybe I dragged it off and forgotten about it, but no, it was nowhere in sight. A bit unsettled, I decided to chalk it up to me being forgetful and moved on. As the day wore on, little things started to nag at me. Shadows seemed to shift just beyond my line of sight. Once, I thought I heard faint laughter, but I assumed it was the wind. I should have been alone out here. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, but every time I looked around, I was still alone. Well after dark, I sat down for a late dinner. While eating, I felt that prickling sensation again, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I scanned the perimeter, but again I saw nothing out of the ordinary. Then, a sudden rustling sound caught my attention. About 20 yards away, the bushes shook violently as if something big was moving through them. I stood up in an instant, ready to go. "Hello?" I called out, getting no response. Wildlife was common out here, deer, foxes, sometimes a bear, but this felt different. Deciding it was best to keep working and finish up, I got back to it. By the time I loaded up the last of the logs onto the trailer, it was deep into the night. The woods were quiet, the daytime creatures settling down as the nocturnal ones began to stir. I checked my watch. 1 a.m. time had really gotten away from me. I pulled out my cell phone and called home. Mom answered on the second ring. "Hey, Mom. Just letting you know I'm going to camp out here for the night. It's a nice evening, and I'd rather not drive back in the dark." "All right, Han. Be safe and call us the moment you need anything." "Will do. Good night." After hanging up, I set about making a simple camp. I always kept a small tent and sleeping bag in the truck for occasions just like this. With the tent pitched near the truck, I started a small fire to cook some dinner. Just canned beans and hot dogs. But they really hit the spot. Sitting by the fire, I pulled out a book my dad had lent me, a non-fiction book about the Civil War. My dad was a bit of a history and folklore buff. After a while, I closed the book, tossing another log on the fire. The night was calm, the fire crackling softly. But the quiet was soon interrupted by a faint sound, like someone stepping on dry leaves. I looked up, peering into the dark beyond the fire's glow. Just some animal, I thought to myself. Still, the feeling of being watched returned, a bit stronger than before. I decided to turn in, thinking after all that hard work, it'd be easy to sleep. I doused the fire, leaving just a few embers glowing, then crawled into my tent. Lying there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the strange occurrences throughout the day were just adding up and getting to me. Sometime later, I drifted off, only to be jolted awake by a loud thump. I sat bolt upright. The sound had come from near my truck. Listening closely, I heard what sounded like heavy breathing, but it was irregular. I unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. The moonlight made everything look extra creepy, with how it cast the shadows, but I didn't see anything unusual, at least, not at first. The truck and trailer were sitting there just as they should, but then I saw something. A shadow slipping behind a tree, too big to be any animal I knew. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. Then I saw the shadow move again, darting from one tree to the next, always just out of full view. It was like it knew exactly where my gaze would land and avoided it perfectly. There was something familiar about it, but I wasn't sure why. I tried to calm myself, telling myself it was nothing, just my eyes playing tricks. Gathering my courage, I grabbed the flashlight and shone it toward the trees. Everything was silent until I began to hear the breathing again, closer this time. I swung the flashlight around frantically. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure, a tall, gaunt shape slipping behind a tree. My hand shook, the light wobbling. I knew, deep down, that I shouldn't stay out here. Slowly, I backed into the tent and packed up what little I had inside. Emerging cautiously, I made my way toward the truck, keys in hand. The trailer was loaded down with logs. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. The engine roared to life, and I felt a wave of relief. I put the truck in gear and tried to pull forward, but the vehicle struggled. The weight of the loaded trailer was too much for the uneven terrain. Panic set in. With the trailer attached, maneuvering quickly would be nearly impossible. If I could get moving at all, I needed to unhook it. Gathering every ounce of courage I had, I stepped back outside into the dark. I was terrified. I could feel eyes on me, and my hair stood on end. I worked quickly, unlatching the trailer, causing metal to clank loudly in the forest. Then I heard it, a low growl behind me. Too scared to glance in that direction, I finished unhooking the trailer and jumped back into the truck. Flooring it, the tires spun for a moment before gaining traction, and I sped down the rough path, branches scraping the sides. In the rearview mirror, I thought I saw movement, a dark shape standing in the middle of the path, but it vanished as I rounded a bend. The drive back was a blur. I didn't slow down until I saw the lights of the farmhouse in the distance. Pulling into the yard, I shut off the engine and sat there, hands gripping the wheel tightly. I didn't tell my parents the full story, just that I decided to come back early. They noticed the trailer was missing, and I explained I'd left it there, planning to retrieve it the next day. That night, sleep eluded me. I kept thinking about what I'd seen. The next morning, Dad and I drove back to get the trailer. The area looked normal enough in the daylight. The trailer was still there, loaded with logs. "Why'd you unhook it out here?" Dad asked. "Had some trouble maneuvering last night," I replied. "We hitched it back up without incident." As we were about to leave, I glanced back toward the trees. For a brief moment, I swear I saw a dark shape slip behind a trunk, but it could have been a trick of the light. Back home, I went straight to the bookshelf in my dad's study. Something about the experience felt familiar, though I couldn't put my finger on why. I searched through the volumes until I found one I remembered reading years ago, a book on North American forest folklore. I read through the evening until I came to one creature, the hide-behind. According to legend, the hide-behind preyed on those alone in the woods after dark. It could contort its body to hide behind the narrowest of trees, always staying just out of sight. Victims often reported feelings of dread and the sensation of being watched before disappearing without a trace. A shiver ran through me. I wasn't one to believe in folklore. I'd always thought it was just fun to read, but the parallels were too strong to ignore. I decided to share a bit with my dad in a subtle way. "Have you ever heard any stories about strange things in the woods?" I asked him. He looked at me. "Your great-grandpa used to tell tales about creatures out there, some old lumberjack legends." "Like the hide-behind?" He raised an eyebrow. "You've been reading that book, huh?" "Yeah, just curious." "Those are just stories, son. But honestly, I've always thought every legend had a kernel of truth. Always good to be cautious out there, especially if you're alone." I nodded, not entirely reassured. From that point on, I believed something was out there. I avoided going deep into the woods alone and stuck to familiar areas near the farm. One evening, I met up with a friend who lived nearby and mentioned my experience. To my surprise, he didn't laugh me off. "Well, you're not the first to feel that way out there," he said. "I've heard old-timers around here talk about strange happenings, stories of missing livestock and eerie sounds. Some of them won't even go into the woods after dark anymore." This was both comforting and unsettling. To know I wasn't alone in this was a small relief, but it also made everything feel more real. To this day, I tread carefully on our land. The woods aren't as serene as they used to be. They're a place to be respected and feared. What do you think? Do you believe the hide-behind is real? Have you ever encountered one? Let me know, because I'm very, very curious. Thank you for tuning in to Unexplained Encounters. I had gone camping a few times before, but never like this. This spot was way deeper in the woods than I had ever been. I wanted some time alone, away from the noise and people, and this seemed like the perfect place. I parked my car at the edge of a small open area, grabbed my stuff and set up camp. By the time it was late afternoon, everything was set. The tent was up, I had gathered enough firewood, and I started a small fire to keep the chill away. As the sun started to go down, I noticed how quiet it was. No birds, no wind, no sounds from the bushes. Just nothing. I had hoped for some peace, but this silence felt weird, almost too heavy. I tried to ignore the strange feeling and focused on making my dinner. The fire crackled as I ate, but the strange feeling stuck with me. I kept glancing into the woods, expecting to see something moving, but there was nothing, or at least not yet. It got dark faster than I thought it would. I put out the fire and crawled into my tent. Usually when I camp, the sounds of the forest help me fall asleep, but tonight it felt off. It was way too quiet. I closed my eyes, trying to force myself to sleep, but every small sound outside made my heart race. A twig snapping, leaves rustling. Normal sounds in the woods, but tonight they felt different, like they were too close. Hours passed, and I was finally starting to doze off when I woke up suddenly. My heart was pounding, and I wasn't sure why. It wasn't a noise that woke me, it was the lack of it. There was no wind, no animal sounds, nothing. I lay there listening, trying to hear anything outside the tent, and that's when I felt it. Something was out there. I don't know how I knew, but I could feel it. My skin went cold, and I broke into a sweat. I stayed completely still, trying not to breathe too loud. I kept telling myself I was just being paranoid, that it was all in my head, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then I heard it, a soft crunch of leaves, like footsteps, slow and steady, moving around my tent. Someone or something was walking out there. My heart raced as I listened, trying to figure out where it was coming from. The steps circled the tent once, then again, then they stopped. The silence after that was worse than the sound of the footsteps. I didn't dare move. I lay there frozen in fear, every second dragging on like it would never end. After what felt like forever, the footsteps started again, but this time they moved away deeper into the woods. I stayed still for a long time, too scared to do anything. Eventually, I worked up the courage to unzip the tent just a little and peek outside. There was nothing there. No one. I didn't sleep at all after that. I kept waiting to hear those footsteps again, or to see something moving outside the tent, but nothing happened. When the sun finally came up, I didn't waste any time. I packed up my stuff as fast as I could and threw everything into my car. As I was driving away, something caught my eye at the edge of the clearing where the woods began. Footprints. Not animal tracks, but human ones. They led into the trees and disappeared. The thought hit me hard. Whoever had been out there had been watching me. They knew I was there. They had circled my tent, listening to me, waiting for something. I pressed down on the gas, wanting to get out of there as quickly as possible. The whole drive home, my heart wouldn't stop pounding. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been there all night watching me. I checked my rearview mirror more times than I'd like to admit. Even though I was miles away, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, maybe even following me. As I drove, I couldn't help but wonder if I had been watched the whole time I was out there, even before I heard those footsteps. I had been traveling around Italy for a while, and after a few weeks of seeing the sights, I needed a break from the crowded cities. I found a quiet campsite near the mountains, far from any main roads or towns. The area was calm. Tall trees surrounded a small open space, and a thin stream ran along the edge of the site. It seemed like the perfect spot to unwind for a couple of nights. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and sat back to enjoy the peacefulness. The first day went by smoothly. I spent the afternoon walking around, listening to the sounds of the forest and the occasional bird off in the distance. As the sun went down, everything grew quiet, almost too quiet, but I brushed it off, telling myself I was just overthinking it. That night I woke up to a strange noise outside the tent. At first I thought it was an animal. Wild boar or deer were common in this part of the country, so I wasn't too worried. But the sound was odd, like something heavy being dragged across the dirt, slow and steady. I listened for a while, my heart racing a little, but eventually the noise stopped and I fell back asleep. The next morning I walked around the area looking for any signs of what might have made the noise. I couldn't find anything out of the ordinary, so I figured maybe I had dreamed it. I spent the day hiking a bit further up into the mountains, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Something about the quietness of the woods, how empty and still it felt, made me uncomfortable. That night, I went into my tent earlier, hoping a good night's sleep would help me forget about it. But in the middle of the night, I woke up again to the same sound. This time it was even closer, right outside the tent. A slow dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the ground. I stayed still, listening, barely breathing. The sound slowly moved around the tent, circling it. I could feel the ground slightly shaking beneath me with each pass. It felt like it went on forever. Finally, the sound faded away into the woods. I stayed awake until the sun came up, listening, but the forest had gone dead silent again. The next morning, I decided I'd had enough and wanted to leave early. As I was taking down my tent, I noticed something strange in the dirt around where my tent had been. There were deep, smooth grooves, like something heavy had been dragged around the campsite. The marks were wide and didn't look natural. There were no footprints or signs of any animals, just the strange, dragging lines that led into the woods. Curious, I followed the trail. It led deeper into the forest, weaving between the trees. I walked for a while until I came to a small clearing. At first, there didn't seem to be anything there, just an empty patch of dirt. But then I saw it. A large, heavy stone, smooth and round, sitting in the middle of the clearing. The ground around it was disturbed, like the stone had been dragged through the dirt, just like the marks back at my campsite. It didn't make any sense. There was no reason for it to be there, no sign of people, no explanation for how such a huge stone could have moved. It looked like someone, or something, had been dragging it through the forest. I backed away, my heart pounding, and hurried back to the campsite. As I packed up my gear, my hands were shaking. I just wanted to get out of there. As I was finishing up, I heard it again. The dragging noise, faint but growing louder, coming from the direction of the clearing. It was heading my way. I didn't look back. I grabbed my stuff and took off, walking as fast as I could without running. I didn't stop until I was far away from that place. I don't know what I saw, and I don't know what was out there with me. But the way that stone had been moved, the way that sound followed me, I can't shake the feeling that whatever was out there wasn't human. Something was watching me, something that didn't want me to see it. And I still wonder what might have happened if I hadn't left when I did. I decided to take my stepbrother Mark on a camping trip. We were both excited about it. The plan was to head to a remote spot deep in the woods, far from other people. I thought it would be a good chance for us to bond and escape our busy lives. We got to the site in the early afternoon. It was a quiet, out-of-the-way place by a small lake, surrounded by thick trees. The place was perfect, isolated, peaceful, and far from any other campers. We set up our tent, built a fire, and spent the evening cooking over it. The night was cool, but nothing too unusual. Around midnight, after Mark had fallen asleep, I was lying in the tent, looking at the faint light of the lantern. The sounds of the forest were soothing, except for one thing: a steady, distant thud. It sounded like someone was hitting something, or a muffled drumbeat. At first, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just an echo or some animal, but as the hours went by, the sound got louder and more urgent. It was coming from the direction of the trees, not far from our campsite. I tried to wake Mark, but he was deep in sleep, and shaking him only made him mumble. Feeling more curious and uneasy, I decided to check it out. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. The night was dark, and the thudding seemed to grow louder as I walked toward the forest. My flashlight cut through the darkness, casting creepy shadows on the trees. The thud was now mixed with a strange scraping noise. I moved carefully, shining my flashlight around. The noise seemed to come from near an old, half-buried tree stump. As I got closer, I saw a broken wooden crate, partly hidden under leaves and dirt. It was the source of the scraping sound. I was about to look closer when I noticed something strange about the crate. It was covered in what looked like dried mud and old blood. My heart raced, and I felt a shiver down my spine as I realized this crate hadn't just been left here. It had been purposely hidden. I pulled at the crate, and it came loose with a groan. Inside there was a small, rusty metal box. I hesitated, but finally opened it. Inside, I found old photographs and personal items, most of them with people's faces scratched out or covered up. A chilling feeling washed over me. It was clear this box didn't belong here, and the stuff inside was deeply unsettling. I quickly closed the box and buried it again as best as I could, my mind racing with thoughts. I returned to the tent, trying to stay calm and not wake Mark. The next morning, I packed up our stuff, eager to leave the place. I didn't tell Mark about the crate. I thought it was better not to scare him. We left the campsite without any trouble, and the drive back was quiet. As I looked back at the forest from the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had uncovered something deeply disturbing. It wasn't just the crate or the strange noise. It was the unsettling thought that whatever was hidden in that box was meant to stay buried. The forest seemed to watch us as we drove away, like it was holding its breath, waiting for us to leave. I couldn't escape the sense that we had been watched, and that we had left something behind, something that didn't want to be found. The unease lingered long after we were gone, and I knew that whatever we had stumbled upon was still out there, waiting in the shadows. I was in the army, and we were on a training exercise deep in the woods. We had set up camp for the night, far from any town or road. The trees were thick around us, and the only sounds were the leaves rustling and the occasional distant call of an animal. The air was cold, and a mist was starting to creep in, making the night feel even more isolated. We'd been moving all day, carrying heavy packs and gear, and by the time we set up our tents, I was exhausted. We ate quickly, using our headlamps to see what we were doing, then crawled into our sleeping bags. The forest was dark, with only the faint glow of our campfire and the dim lights of our headlamps to break through the blackness. Lying in my tent, I stared up at the fabric above me, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping in. Something about this place felt wrong, but I thought it was just because I was tired, so I tried to sleep. I woke up to a strange noise. It was a low, steady thumping, like something heavy hitting the ground over and over. I listened closely, trying to figure out what it was. The sound was steady, almost like footsteps, but too heavy to be a person. I sat up and unzipped the tent quietly, peeking out into the darkness. The mist had thickened, making it hard to see much beyond the faint glow of our dying fire. I couldn't see anyone else moving, so I figured the others were still asleep, but the thumping continued, getting louder and closer. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the tent. My boots sank slightly into the damp ground. I moved the light around the camp but saw nothing unusual. The sound was coming from deeper in the woods, just beyond the trees that surrounded our campsite. My gut told me to stay put, but something else, maybe curiosity or a sense of duty, pushed me forward. I walked slowly toward the noise, each step feeling heavier as the sound grew louder. The mist swirled around me, and the trees seemed to close in, their branches almost reaching out like hands in the darkness. I kept going, my breath visible in the cold air. As I got closer, I noticed something strange. The ground was disturbed, like something had been dragged through the dirt and leaves. My heart pounded in my chest, and I fought the urge to turn back, but I kept going, stepping over the disturbed earth until I reached a small open area. In the middle of the clearing was a huge tree, its trunk twisted and gnarled, roots sticking out in all directions. The sound was coming from behind it. I moved around the tree, my flashlight aimed ahead, trying to stay calm. When I got around the tree, I froze. There was a massive pit in the ground, about 10 feet wide and just as deep. The edges were rough, freshly dug, with chunks of earth scattered around. At the bottom of the pit, something big and dark was moving slowly. That was the source of the thumping. I squinted, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked like an animal, but it was too big, its movements too deliberate. As I watched, it pulled something out of the ground, a long, thick root, or maybe a branch, and slammed it against the side of the pit over and over, creating that horrible, steady sound. The truth of what I was seeing hit me hard. This wasn't an animal. It was a person, or what used to be a person. Their body was covered in mud, muscles straining as they dug desperately into the ground. The hole was filled with other things, too, old bones, bits of cloth, and what looked like pieces of metal or wood. It was a grave, or maybe several graves, all mashed together in one horrific pit. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. This person had been digging for a long time, alone out here in the woods, their mind gone from the isolation, or maybe something worse. And now they were creating this place, this pit of death. I turned and ran back to camp as fast as I could, my breath coming in short gasps. When I reached the tents, I collapsed to my knees, trying to calm myself down. My mind was spinning, trying to process what I'd just seen. We left the campsite at first light, no one saying a word about the night. I never told anyone about the pit or the person digging it, but the memory of that sound, the steady thump of earth being moved, has stayed with me, haunting my thoughts. Now, whenever I'm alone in the woods, I listen carefully, dreading the day I hear it again, because I know that if I do, it won't just be a sound in the distance. It will be close, too close. And I won't be able to turn away. The pit will be waiting, and this time, I'll be the one pulled into the darkness. This happened when I was growing up, around 2004 or 2005. I was about 13 years old. It took place in a rural area quite a ways outside of Uvalde, Texas. The town itself was really small back then, not much to look at, just one of those towns that really isn't on the way to anywhere important. My father knew someone who owned a deer lease that was about 1,000 acres down in that area. Anne, the owner, had been complaining a ton about hogs tearing up their land. Since it was open season on hogs in the south, my dad thought he would surprise me that summer and take me down for a week to go hunting. It not only helped him with networking for his job, but it also gave us some quality father-son time. I remember the drive down from Dallas. It was torture. It was about 7 hours in my dad's hardtop Jeep Wrangler. The car was so uncomfortable, I hated it. All I could do was either stare out the window or try to play Super Mario Land 2 on my Game Boy Pocket, something I was never able to accomplish in my youth. The drive obviously took most of the day, and we got there in the early evening. The owner of the land had told my dad that he hadn't had anyone lease it that year, and the cabin on the property might be a little rough and dusty. I didn't really care at that point in my life. I'd been in the Scouts for a couple of years and spent a lot of my free time in the woods fishing or with friends. Needless to say, I was pretty comfortable roughing it. So, after unlocking the gate and driving down to the cabin on the land, we settled in. The cabin was pretty rough. Dust covered everything, flies buzzed around, and it looked like some raccoons had gotten into the place. After cleaning up a bit and getting out the sleeping bags, then setting up the cots, we decided to sleep. Something about that night was weird. I was never able to get comfortable enough to fall asleep for any restful amount. I couldn't quite put my finger on why, but I had the feeling of being watched. I finally drifted off, what I guess was maybe an hour. When we woke up it was early, around 7 a.m. We decided to scout around the land for tracks and signs of hogs and find a good place to set up a blind. It was summer, and it was horribly hot in the afternoon, so morning was the best time to be out. After walking for an hour or so, we came upon some lightly dense trees, and luckily found signs of the hogs, typically torn up ground where they had been rooting. So we followed them into the trees. I was looking for more signs when my dad stopped me with his arm. I remember looking up and seeing someone standing about 50 yards away. Some of their body was blocked by the trees. This was private land, so they definitely weren't supposed to be there. We had also confirmed from the owner before we got to the lease that nobody was out there. Not to mention the gate was locked when we first arrived. The person was wearing a brightly colored red jacket. We slowly walked toward them, and my dad called out something like, "Hey, we're hunters. This is private land." The person didn't move at all, dead still. We were about 30 yards away and could see that they were turned away from us with their hands in their pockets. The weird thing was that this person was wearing a ski jacket and what looked to be ski pants. Now this is Texas in the summer. It was about 98 degrees outside by then. My dad called out again. Still no reaction. He told me to stay behind him and unsnap the clip on his pistol holster. We approached the person's right side, and my dad told me to stay put about 20 yards away. I stayed, crouched down, and watched him circle around to the front of the man, all while talking to him and asking if he was okay. He finally passed around, and my dad stood up straight with a confused look on his face. I called out, "What's wrong?" He called back, saying, "It's a mannequin." I walked over to it while my dad just stood there staring at it. As I got closer, one thing stood out the most. The clothes it was wearing were brand new. No dust, no sap, no bird droppings, or signs of being outside for more than a day at most. That moment, I looked at my dad, and I could see him get worried almost immediately. After that, I felt that same feeling again, like we were being watched. And I know my dad felt it too. I wanted to start crying, and I remember feeling suddenly so scared. My dad whispered, "We're leaving right now." He grabbed my hand and drew his pistol. He scanned the area the entire way back while I was trying to hold back panic tears. We got back as fast as we could. I was so terrified, but it felt like an eternity. In reality, it was only maybe 45 minutes max. After returning, we packed up and left that day. We didn't talk much on the way back. I remember right after we left, my dad called his buddy, the owner of the land, and he was confused. He said that he would go check it out the next week when he was in the area. He also said that he had never had any issues with people because his property was high-fenced. My dad isn't normally a paranoid person, but with me being young and the possibility of someone out there that we didn't know about, he decided to be cautious and just get out of there. After we got back home, we talked. My dad wasn't able to sleep the night before either. He had that same feeling I did, but didn't want to wake me up because he thought I was sleeping. Turns out the next week he got a call from his buddy. He checked the whole property and never found any trace of anyone. No mannequin or anything. That story still makes my hair stand on end. No idea what that was, but the paranoid part of me thinks it was some kind of trap or something. Not the creepiest thing that happened to me in the woods, but definitely in the top 3. I'm a Canadian cop, and last summer I decided to spend a weekend camping alone in the wild. I picked a secluded spot deep in the woods, far from any trails, hoping for some real peace and quiet. The place was beautiful, tall pines, a calm lake, and just the sounds of the forest. I set up my tent and started a fire to cook dinner. As the sun went down, the forest grew dark, and the usual quiet was sometimes broken by the sound of leaves rustling. I felt pretty relaxed, knowing I was ready for anything and used to being out here alone. Around midnight, I was woken up by a soft, steady tapping on my tent. At first, I thought it was just branches moving in the wind, or maybe a small animal, but then the tapping got louder and more rhythmic. It was coming from different sides of the tent, and it felt too organized to be random. My instincts kicked in, and I grabbed my flashlight and gun, even though I was off duty. I slowly unzipped the tent and shone my flashlight around. There was nothing there. The forest was unnervingly quiet. I stepped outside and checked the area. Everything seemed fine, but I noticed something odd. The ground around my tent was disturbed, like someone had walked around it carefully, staying out of the light from the fire. My heart was pounding, but I tried to stay cool. I decided to check it out, keeping my flashlight and gun ready as I walked around. I found small footprints in the dirt, bare footprints. They were fresh, and the fact that there were no shoes meant someone had been trying hard to stay hidden. I followed the tracks, keeping my distance and moving quietly. They led me to the edge of the lake, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. Across the lake, I saw a figure standing among the trees, barely visible in the dim light. The figure didn't move, almost like it was watching me. A chill went down my spine. I knew I had to get out of there. I hurried back to my camp, packed up quickly, and got into my vehicle. As I drove away, I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see someone behind me. The figure was gone, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. Back home, I reported the strange events to the local police, but no one was ever found in that area. The footprints and the odd disturbances around my tent were never explained. It was a harsh reminder that even in the most isolated places, you're never truly alone. The unsettling reality is that someone or something was out there, watching and waiting. My mom and I planned a camping trip by this quiet lake we'd been to before. It wasn't far, only an hour's drive from home, deep in the woods. We liked it because it was calm and no one else went there, so we felt safe, even though it was far from everything. The first day went smoothly. We set up the tent, got a fire going, and spent the day sitting by the water. The air was fresh, and it was quiet, no one around for miles. It felt nice, like we had the whole place to ourselves. When night came, we climbed into our sleeping bags. I could hear the soft sounds of the forest outside, leaves rustling, a few crickets. It helped me fall asleep fast. But sometime during the night, I woke up. The fire had gone out, and it was completely dark inside the tent. The only light came from the moon outside, but even that was faint. As I lay there, I heard a noise outside the tent. At first, I thought it was just the wind in the trees, but then I realized it was something else, something closer. It sounded like something moving through the bushes near us. I stayed still, listening hard, trying to figure out what it was. My heart was beating fast, but I didn't want to move. Then I heard it again, a dragging sound, low and slow, like something was being pulled across the ground. I froze, trying to convince myself it was just a deer or some animal, but the noise kept coming closer, slowly making its way around the tent. I looked at my mom, who was still asleep next to me. I didn't want to wake her up and make her scared if it was nothing, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. Suddenly, the tent moved. It wasn't a big movement, just a slight push, but enough to make my stomach twist. Whatever was out there had brushed against the side of the tent. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound. I didn't move, just listened, waiting for it to happen again. But nothing happened for a while. Then, after what felt like forever, I heard soft footsteps, faint at first, then quieter as they moved back into the woods. I lay there, eyes wide open, not daring to close them again. I stayed like that until morning, listening to every little noise, waiting for it to come back, but it never did. By the time the sun came up, I had almost convinced myself I imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind after all, or maybe I was dreaming and woke up in the middle of it. My mom didn't say anything about hearing noises, so I didn't bring it up. We spent the day fishing and hiking, but I couldn't shake this feeling that something wasn't right. Every time I looked at the trees, I felt like there were eyes on us, like someone or something was watching. But I kept quiet. I didn't want to scare my mom or ruin the trip. The second night, I barely slept. Every sound seemed louder, every shadow seemed bigger. I lay there with my eyes open most of the night, just waiting, but nothing happened. It was almost too quiet, and that made me even more nervous. When the morning came, I felt a wave of relief. We packed up quickly, eager to get out of there. As we loaded up the car, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Right outside where our tent had been, there were deep, long drag marks in the dirt. They led from the trees right up to our tent, and then back into the woods. I didn't say anything to my mom, but I couldn't stop staring at those marks. They were way too big to be from any animal. I knew it looked like something heavy had been dragged around our tent in the middle of the night, right when I heard those sounds. We left, and as we drove off, I kept looking back at the woods, expecting to see someone or something standing at the edge, watching us go, but there was nothing. The trees looked empty. Now, every time I think about that night, I feel a deep chill run down my spine. Whatever was out there, it wasn't just passing by. It had come right up to our tent, close enough to touch us, and it left without a trace. But the worst part? I can't stop wondering why it left, or if it'll come back the next time someone camps there. Camping with a friend had been something I had been excited about for weeks. We planned to hike to a remote spot, set up our tent by a quiet lake, and spend a weekend away from everything. The drive to the trailhead was calm, with only the sound of trees rustling and gravel crunching under the tires. We parked, grabbed our gear, and began the hike. The trail was hard to see, covered with thick brush and trees, the kind of place you'd only find if you knew exactly where it was. We made our way through the woods, using an old map I had found online. As we went deeper into the forest, the trees became denser, blocking out most of the sunlight. It was cooler there, and the air smelled of damp earth and pine. After a couple of hours, we reached the lake. It was small and almost hidden by the trees, with a surface as still as a mirror. We chose a spot on the far side, away from any possible visitors. It was perfect. We set up the tent, collected some firewood, and got ready for the night. The first night was normal, with just the usual forest sounds around us. By the second day, we had explored the area and even found an old abandoned cabin a short walk from our camp. It looked like it hadn't been used in years, with the roof falling in and the door barely hanging on. We peeked inside but found nothing but dust and rotting wood. It was clear no one had been there for a long time. As night fell on the second day, the forest seemed to get quieter. We sat by the fire, enjoying the warmth and the sense of being alone. It was the kind of quiet that makes you notice every small sound, branches snapping, leaves rustling, and distant animal calls. But then we started hearing something different. At first it was faint, almost like wind, but it wasn't. It was a low, steady hum coming from deep in the woods. We both heard it, but neither of us said anything. It was probably just a natural sound we weren't used to, but the hum grew louder, and with it came a feeling I couldn't shake. It felt like we were being watched, like something was out there, just beyond the firelight. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling only got stronger as the night went on. The hum became more noticeable, almost like a low, mechanical buzz, and it was getting closer. My heart started to race. I could tell my friend was also on edge, but we both tried to stay calm. We knew we were far from civilization, with no cell service and no easy way out. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. The forest was completely silent, as if it was holding its breath. That's when we saw it. Movement in the trees, just outside the fire's glow. It was fast, darting between the trees, too quick to see clearly. My stomach twisted with fear. I wanted to say something, to suggest we pack up and leave, but I couldn't find the words. The fire began to die down, casting long, flickering shadows. I grabbed more wood, but my hands were trembling as I threw the logs on the fire. I noticed the movement had stopped. The forest was still again, but the sense of unease remained, like the tension before a storm. We hardly slept that night, and when morning finally came, we were both on edge. We decided to cut our trip short. We packed up quickly, not talking about what had happened. The hike back to the car was nerve-wracking. Every sound made me jump, and every shadow seemed like it was hiding something, waiting to pounce. When we finally reached the car, a wave of relief washed over me. We threw our gear in the back and left as fast as we could. As we drove away, I glanced back at the forest. Now just a dark line on the horizon. The hum was gone, the movement was gone, but the feeling of being watched stayed with me. Now, even after all this time, I can't explain what happened that night. There were no ghosts or monsters, just a sound and a feeling that something was out there, something that didn't want us there. The most unsettling part? I'm not sure if it was watching us or if it knew we were leaving. Either way, I haven't been back to those woods since. Some places hold secrets we're better off never uncovering, and I know now that some experiences leave marks that never fully fade. I never expected a camping trip with my mother-in-law to become so unsettling. It was meant to be a relaxing weekend escape. Just the three of us, my wife, her mother, and me. We chose a spot deep in the woods, far away from the city's noise, hoping for some peace and quiet. We set up our tents and started a fire. As night fell, the forest was filled with the sounds of crickets and rustling leaves, but something felt off from the beginning. I figured it was just me being out of my element. After dinner, we sat by the fire, and as darkness took over, the shadows from the trees seemed to stretch and twist in strange ways. I tried to ignore the uneasy feeling and went to bed early, hoping a good night's sleep would help. Around midnight, I woke up to a scratching sound against the tent. My heart started racing. I held my breath, trying to listen. The scratching stopped, replaced by a faint dragging noise. I lay there frozen, too scared to move. I must have waited hours before I finally managed to look outside. The forest was completely silent, and everything seemed normal. I went back to sleep, but the uneasy feeling stayed with me. The next morning, my mother-in-law looked more tired than usual. She had dark circles under her eyes and seemed jittery. I didn't say anything, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Later, we decided to go for a hike. We followed a narrow path that led us deeper into the forest. About an hour in, I saw fresh footprints in the dirt, but they weren't ours. They were small and seemed to be going in the direction we had just come from. My skin crawled with fear, but I kept quiet, not wanting to worry anyone. When we got back to the campsite, I found my wife and her mother huddled together, looking through their belongings. Some of their personal items were missing, things that weren't just misplaced, but had been taken. That night, the scratching sound came back, louder and more persistent. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and went outside. The forest was completely dark, with only my flashlight cutting through the blackness. I looked around the campsite, my heart pounding hard. Then I saw it. Deep, strange scratches in the dirt that made a circle around our campsite. My stomach dropped as I realized they were too precise to be made by animals. I rushed back to the tent, trying to ignore the growing fear in my gut. I made up my mind. I packed up our things and told my wife we were leaving right away. Even though she was hesitant, I was adamant. We drove home in the middle of the night, feeling a sense of relief as we left the forest behind. When we finally got home, I couldn't stop thinking about what we had escaped. The scratches, the missing items, and the unsettling noises. It wasn't until weeks later that I learned the area we camped in had a history of strange occurrences and disappearances. What scares me the most is that someone or something might have been watching us the entire time, waiting for the right moment to strike. I still wonder what would have happened if we had stayed just one more night.